live.
Let's do this. Good afternoon. It is February the 9th, Wednesday, February the 9th, and this is the House Judiciary Committee. We have 4 bills that we're going to be hearing today. We'll go through the order here in a moment. As always, members, please set yourselves to mute. Only unmute when I recognize you to ask a question. After a witness testifies, you can ask questions by selecting the raise hand feature on your Zoom window, and I'll recognize members in the order in which they raise their hands. Witnesses, you will unmute yourself when I recognize you to present your testimony. After you present your testimony and answer any questions from the committee, please exit the Zoom hearing room. At all times, members of the public will be able to view the live stream of the meeting. It's accessible on the Maryland General Assembly's website. As I mentioned, there are 4 bills, 3 of which are bills that we have heard before. We're going to hear them first. They're 322, 323, and 349. All of them are going to be on what we call the 2-in-1 rule. So 2 minutes for a sponsor, and then a minute for the witnesses who are signed up to testify. The other bill, House Bill 425, which is the bill on untraceable firearms, will be 3 and 2, 3 minutes for the sponsor, 2 minutes for the witnesses. And so we'll hear those with those time constraints. And so let us get on the road. We have House Bill 322. This is Delegate Lopez. And Delegate Lopez has Marceline White, Isadora Stern, Kathleen Highland, David Schley, and Steve Sakamoto Wengel. We'll hear from all of them and then take questions. And then I see Bob Enton as favorable with amendments. So we'll just hear from those that are straight favorables and then go to Bob Enton. So with that, Delegate Lopez for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Leslie Lopez here to ask for your favorable report on HB 322. This bill clarifies Maryland's current law by automatically exempting $500 in an individual's bank account from collection by creditors. In layman's terms, this bill keeps creditors from taking your last $500. As they work to pay back their debt, Marylanders should not be subjected to so much garnishment that they cannot make basic ends meet. Maryland's law already requires $6,000 of protection for an individual's property, including their vehicle, cash, and other valuables. However, this exemption is not automatic. The debtor must elect to take it. Many people facing debt collection are unaware of this, resulting in all or nearly all of their assets being seized at once to pay back the debt. HB 322 merely makes automatic a small fraction of this existing exemption, shielding $500 in a debtor's bank account from collection. This amount, while small in number for the collectors, is absolutely crucial for these families. It can mean that they keep the ability to pay for food, medication, rent, utilities, or other essential needs. Many other states already have this automatic exemption, but for significantly more money. Massachusetts protects up to $2,500. New York protects up to $3,600 or 240 times the minimum wage. And Washington State protects $2,000 in a bank account. We opted for this smaller amount because it built consensus from all stakeholders, and though a greater amount would undoubtedly be better, for the sake of providing urgent relief, we went with the agreed upon amount. So in conclusion, HB 322 provides an automatic layer of financial protection that will give families more stability as they work to pay off their debt. Thank you for your time, and I urge a favorable report.
All right. Marceline White, please.
Marceline had dental surgery today.
Here,
so
that's sad. All right, so we'll go with you or
okay.
Isadora Stern. We could go with you.
Thanks. Isadora is also from the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, so I didn't know if she was speaking on behalf of
Why don't we do that? That's fine. Isadora Stern can go, and then we'll do Kathleen Highland, and we'll do 2 minutes. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Isadora Stern, here with the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. MCRC is a statewide nonprofit working to advance economic equality through education, direct service, research, and advocacy. The goal of state exemption law is to protect households from financial ruin and leave families with enough to pay for basic necessities as they repay their debt. In our 2018 no exit report, we found that in 2016, there were more than 27,000 property garnishments, the majority of which were occurring in communities of color. So this policy recommendation was adopted by Attorney General Frosch's Access to Justice Commission as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which further exacerbated these problems. Our analysis shows that the automatic exemption of $500 will help protect approximately 50% of Maryland residents in collections from having their bank accounts zeroed out. We believe that struggling families should be able to protect more than $500, but we have reached a compromise and prefer to pass a $500 exemption this year to protect low-income households who are struggling amidst the pandemic now. Thank you, and I urge a favorable report.
I had made a slight error before. I did say that this was going to be a 2-in-1 bill, and I accidentally went a little long for Delegate Lopez, so we'll just go back. These are going to be 1 minute, and we'll hear from Kathleen Highland, then David Schley. So Kathleen Highland, please.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair Clippinger and members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of the National Association of Consumer Advocates, whose primary focus is the protection and in the representation of consumers, and represents many different interests from law students to public sector attorneys, private attorneys, et cetera. As part of this mission, NACA is advocating for better debt collection protections for consumers and families. But I'm just going to keep it really brief in my testimony today for once. And what I really want to express is there's a really good purpose for this law, and it's that I regularly have represented consumers who just got garnished for something, a bank garnishment, and their entire account is frozen. So because we don't want them to move their assets before they're garnished, the whole account is being frozen. This law would change it so that they have a little bit of money to pay any bills that they might fall behind on. It was a compromise piece of legislation. This is the second year we're introducing it. And the idea came from the Attorney General's COVID-19 task force. So the whole purpose is just to keep people safe, give them something so that they don't fall behind on everything, and make it so that they're not taking out these over-the-counter high interest loans to pay their weekly daycare bill or their car payment and avoid further credit ramifications while they're already distressed and caused to alert their creditor for repayment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to David Schley now for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chairman. David Schley. I'm the Legislative Director for the Maryland DC Creditors Bar. We're in support of this bill. Kat Highland is correct. This is a compromise bill. Normally, we would have opposed this bill, but we've been working with the other side for approximately probably 3 years, going back and forth. And COVID-19 actually made a lot of changes, in particular because stimulus payments and child tax credit payments have not been protected under the federal law. And thus, a lot of our clients have decided to forestall doing any bank garnishments while trying to make sure that they don't grab money that is should be protected. And so far, we've been able to come up with a compromise. So this, we feel, is the best way to be able to go forward with a nice compromise, an automatic $500 exemption, which will protect a lot of those funds that should have been protected under the federal law, and also enable us to go ahead and start providing those remedies by at the same time protecting those small amounts in the bank account. For all those reasons, Chairman, we support this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to ask staff to go ahead and let Bob Enton in, please, because we'll just go ahead and take him next. Stephen Sakamoto Wengel, please, for 2 minutes. Is he here? Enton is in.
Enable us to go ahead and start providing those remedies.
All right. Mr. Enton will turn off his YouTube feed here in a moment, but hold on 1 second. And Steve Sakamoto Wengel, are you here? All right, Steve is coming back in. We'll hear from him, then we'll go ahead and hear from Bob Enton here in a moment. So let's hear from Steve Sakamoto Wengel.
I'm here.
Great. 1 minute, please.
All right. Good afternoon.
Go ahead. You have a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Steve Sakamoto Wengel from the Consumer Protection Division. Yeah, and we're here in support of House Bill 322. Yes, and here in support of House Bill 322. As has been mentioned, this was a recommendation.
All right, let's do this. Mr. Sakamoto Wango, you're going to need to turn off the YouTube stream in the background.
Yeah,
and
let
keep-
me see if I can cut that one off.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay,
All right, you want to start again for 1 minute, please?
sure. So again, Steve Sakamoto Wango from the Consumer Protection Division here in support of House Bill 322. As has been mentioned, this was a recommendation of the Attorney General's Access to Justice Task Force, which looked at areas where Marylanders were impacted by not only the pandemic, but people who had already had challenges, that were made even worse by the pandemic, and where some relief could be offered. And this bill, by giving people who are in debt, a chance to have access to money when they need it, we think is something that would clearly benefit Marylanders, and would not impose, an unreasonable burden on the creditors. So we urge a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Right. Now we're going to go to Bob Anton, who is favorable with amendments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Etton on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. And I did have a conversation with the sponsor, I think yesterday, about the bill. The concern for the banking industry is primarily that there is no way for the bank to know that the $500 exemption won't put the judgment debtor over the top of the current $6,000 exemption. We worked on this last year. I know we spent a lot of time talking to Delegate Cardin about it to try to come up with some way to at least have the judgment debtor, who is the only person who knows if other exemptions have been taken, somehow signal to the court whether or not what other exemptions have been taken. I greatly appreciate the fact that the amount has been reduced, and we'll take a hard look at this and try to see if we can come up with some procedural fix to make sure that the banks know where the account stands regarding the exemptions. So that would be our concern, and we hope we can get it repaired. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for the panel, both the favorable panel and the favorable with amendments? Delegate Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And actually, Mr. Enton actually brought up what I was going to ask originally. But I think he answered part of it, which is, and maybe Delegate Lopez, we can work on this. But if you have one plaintiff that garnishes, has a judgment, garnishes wages, they take the automatic $500 exemption, they use that money to pay bills, to do what they need to do. All of a sudden, another garnisher comes in. How is the bank? I mean, who is the one who polices whether they are permitted to take that $500 exemption and stop the garnishment from happening? Is it the bank? Mr. Enton said it's the bank, and maybe it's not the bank. Maybe it's somebody else who has to do it. I'm just trying to figure out how you would deal with that. But I guess we could talk about that offline, since it was already brought up that it needs to be worked out.
Sure thing.
Marceline did ask me to help answer any of those questions if anyone wants me to offer an answer.
Go ahead and answer.
Well, our position is that it's not different from the current $6,000 wildcard exemption, where any individual who's sued can come and use the $6,000 wildcard exemption, and then they can get sued again and they can use that $6,000 wildcard exemption again. So the bank is tracking the information, and they could work that into their system, make a note, have an Excel spreadsheet, something to the effect. It doesn't necessarily need to be legislatively fixed because it's not different from the status quo.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to that, because I've represented, as you know, the banks down here for many, many years. I'm their general counsel. The bank is not going to have any idea whether the judgment debtor has claimed $6,000 in exemptions or not. The only person who knows that, the judgment creditor doesn't know it, the bank doesn't know it. The only person who knows that is the judgment debtor. So if you garnish the account and the judgment debtor claimed had $10,000 in the account. Somebody garnished it. He claimed a $6,000 exemption, and he's reached his maximum. If he files, if a judgment creditor files another garnishment at another bank, that other bank is going to have no idea whether the judgment debtor has already claimed the exemption or not. And that's the issue with automatic exemptions. I'm hopeful based on the fact that the amount is so low, maybe we can come up with a solution to that problem. And I would say that while this was a compromise that may have been reached with the collection bar, I probably spoke more about this bill last year than anyone, and no one reached out to the banking industry about this bill whatsoever prior to its introduction. So we're happy to work. Notwithstanding that, that's, we're happy that stuff happens, and we're happy to work on a solution.
Are there further questions for this panel? I guess I'll ask a question to Bob. And I mean, so is the issue here that there could be people who are falling into this situation? Your focus is on whether they have multiple bank accounts. So we're dealing with people who are in such bad financial straits, but they have multiple bank accounts from which debtors could be seeking to pull out money.
Well, let me say this, that first of all, I think you're making an assumption that anyone who gets a judgment against them is someone that's, on the edge. People get sued. Judge, the only way that you can collect a judgment in the state of Maryland, just because you get a judgment doesn't mean you get paid. If you can't find a bank account or a wage to garnish and there are limitations, then you're not going to get paid, period. So if I have a judgment debtor, I don't know his financial circumstances. I don't know anything about him. All I know is that the law says that you can't, that they're not entitled to claim an exemption in excess of $6,000. They can garnish bank A, garnish bank B, and bank C isn't going to have any idea whether they've reached the limit or not. So it's just that those are the rules. I had a lot of conversation with Chief Judge Morrissey about this, and maybe one solution is to try to simplify the forms and make them more clear that the judgment debtor gets when a garnishment's been filed, so that they know all they got to do is check a box and enter a little bit of information and file it, and then they can claim their exemption. And everybody knows where they stand. It's a matter of record. The problem is nobody knows but the judgment debtor where they stand. But once again, I think it's much better than last year's bill, which was at $2,600. This year it's at $500. So I think we can hopefully find a solution to the problem.
All right, thank you very much. Are there further questions for the panel of witnesses? Seeing none, we thank you all very much. And that concludes the testimony for House Bill 322. We're going to go now to House Bill 323 and Delegate Polakovich-Carr, who has witnesses, two of whom are favorable with amendments, so we'll take them separately. We'll hear from Delegate Polakovich-Carr. This is a reintroduction, so Delegate will get 2 minutes, then Jane Santoni, Linda Morris, Melanie Shapiro, and Jessica Emerson. They'll each get 1 minute. Delegate Polakovich-Carr, if you're ready for your 2 minutes, we will go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 323. Every Marylander should have the ability to summon police, firefighters, or medical services during an emergency. However, nuisance laws enacted by some local governments threaten the ability of a resident to get help when they need it. A handful of local jurisdictions in Maryland have enacted laws in the hopes of addressing repeat criminal activity. These nuisance laws subject the landlord or property owner to a fine and possible loss of their rental license if the police are called out to a property too frequently, as little as 2 times within 30 days. No one wants to have neighbors that are engaged in criminal activity, but these laws also serve as a deterrent for residents calling 911 for fear of reprisal by their landlord. That's because the landlord will usually evict the tenant after the first call for police service. This can occur even when the tenant did nothing wrong and was the victim of a crime. As noted by Maryland's Office of Crime Control and Prevention and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, these laws are discriminatory against several protected classes of people, including people of color, victims of domestic violence, LGBTQ+ individuals, and people with disabilities. To that end, a number of lawsuits have been successfully litigated against municipalities in other states because of their enforcement of a nuisance ordinance. This bill would ensure the rights of residents to get help from police, EMS, and the fire department by borrowing local nuisance laws from penalizing landlords and tenants for solely summoning assistance. Specifically, using the number of calls for police or emergency service as part of the definition of a nuisance property would not be allowed. Local governments, however, could still have a nuisance law that is based on a different standard, such as police reports, arrests, or convictions. 9 other states have passed similar legislation. This bill also prohibits a landlord from evicting or threatening to evict a tenant solely based on the summoning of police or emergency assistance. 11 other states plus DC have passed similar laws. Notably, both advocates for renters as well as landlords support this bill. I'm currently working with MACO to address their concerns and will be providing a sponsor amendment to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Jane Santoni for 1 minute, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am here on behalf of the Maryland Association for Justice, as well as myself. On behalf of the people that we are concerned about, mostly vulnerable individuals and individuals who crave access to justice, we support this bill. We don't see a legitimate downside to the bill. When people call the police or the fire department or other assistance, it's usually because they are in desperate need, as is set forth with the position paper supplied by the housing advocates. And so we would just like to join them in supporting that a call to someone to help should not result in the threat of eviction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Linda Morris, please.
Thank you. My name is Linda Morris, and I'm here on behalf of the National ACLU Women's Rights Project and the ACLU of Maryland to urge a favorable report on HB 323. I also happen to be a proud Maryland resident. No one should be afraid to seek emergency aid because doing so will jeopardize their housing. However, landlords and jurisdictions across Maryland have adopted crime-free leases and ordinances with this very consequence. The ACLU has engaged in litigation and advocacy challenging these policies across the country because of their devastating impact on domestic violence survivors, people of color, and people with disabilities, and because of the significant legal concerns they raise under federal and state constitutional and statutory protections, including the First and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and fair housing laws. These policies are especially dangerous for domestic violence survivors, the vast majority of whom are women, as they discourage survivors from seeking potentially life-saving aid out of fear of losing their homes, and contribute to housing insecurity for survivors who are evicted under these policies. And as we know from research, these policies are disproportionately enforced against and perpetuate housing segregation for people of color and people with disabilities. No one should be forced to choose between their safety and their housing. We urge a favorable report on HB 323. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Melanie Shapiro, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Melanie Shapiro with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, here in support of House Bill 323. Nuisance laws negatively impact victims of domestic violence by deterring them from calling police if they need assistance. Domestic violence is already vastly underreported. We don't need any more deterrence for victims seeking services if they so choose. These laws can also contribute to homelessness or housing instability for victims of domestic violence or anyone subject to the nuisance laws. 38% of victims of domestic violence experience homelessness at some point. While both state and federal laws protect victims of domestic violence in the housing realm, including the Fair Housing Act and VAWA, nuisance laws undermine these protections. Nuisance laws are also supposedly neutral, but in practice, they are selectively enforced based on neighborhood, leading to different effects for victims depending on what neighborhood they live in, as well as their race and social class. So for all of those reasons, we urge a favorable report on House Bill 323.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to, Jessica Emerson. There you are. For 1 minute, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Emerson and I direct the Human Trafficking Prevention Project. We support HB 323 because reducing the likelihood of eviction for any rental tenant reduces that tenant's risk of becoming a victim of human trafficking, as homelessness and housing instability are direct predictors of the crime. Homelessness factors heavily into the recruitment process, as traffickers commonly offer safe shelter as a coercive means of recruitment, only to use the victim's fear of being turned back out onto the street as a means of control. In situations where victims live where they are forced to work, such as trafficking that occurs in worker housing, in shelters, or residential group homes, traffickers use their victims' isolation to monitor them and ensure that they're not seeking out help to escape. In recent years, Maryland has begun to show its support for preventing trafficking by addressing the societal challenges that make people more vulnerable to being trafficked. HB 323 would further this goal by reducing the likelihood of homelessness. And for these reasons, the HDPP supports HB 323 and respectfully urges a favorable report. Thanks.
All right, are there questions for this panel? Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for presenting and being here today. Can you walk me through this one more time? Any of the panelists, please. The way I heard the bill presented was that if a call is against a tenant by another tenant, that was how that person was impacted. But it seems to be much more, I'm calling for help, now I'm the person impacted. So can you please walk the committee through practically how one of these situations transpires?
Sure, Delegate Grimmer, and I appreciate the question and the opportunity to explain a little bit more. So say the threshold in a given community is 2 calls for service within 30 days, which is actually a standard in one municipality in Maryland. If, say, a person is in an abusive relationship, they call police, fearing for their physical safety, police come out. Now, the tenant in that case has not done anything wrong. They've been the victim of a crime. But usually with that very first call for service, the local jurisdiction, their police department will actually send a letter out to that tenant's landlord, notify them that there was a call for service on a certain date for a certain reason, and remind or let that landlord know about the local nuisance ordinance. And if there is a subsequent call for service within 30 days, that landlord will be subject to a fine. And if there are repeat violations, they could lose their rental license. So this would apply, whether the tenant is the victim of a crime, whether they called police, or say their neighbor, heard the altercation and was concerned for their neighbor's safety and called the police. Usually there's not a distinction in any of those situations made in these local ordinances.
So the ordinance is adopted by, let's say, the municipality, and the ordinance penalizes a landlord for nuisances that the landlord or property holder is supposed to take care of. And because the landlord is penalized, they somehow come after, they penalize the tenant and saying, look, we have to abide by this ordinance, which, is supposed to limit nuisances. And because of this, I'm going to raise your rent, or I'm going to evict you. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, you are. Yeah. And I'll say, I don't blame the landlords in this situation. They're caught in the middle, where they're facing a monetary fine or loss of their rental license, unless they evict the tenant. So I understand that they're trying to protect, their business and their income.
This is weird to me because I'm familiar with the nuisance laws, but it's typically related to some kind of health issue. Can you maybe just follow up with me, or maybe follow up with the committee and send us some information about which municipalities use this, or even forward some law or code? I'd just like to dig into this, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
All right, are there further questions for the panel? Seeing none, we thank you all very much. And we'll go to 2 people who are favorable with amendments, David Prater and DePaul Nibber. David Prater, please. All right, well, we may have DePaul Nibber. DePaul Nibber?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Great. You've got 1 minute to testify, and then we'll hear from David Prater. So go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is DePaul Nibber, representing the Maryland Association of Counties in support of HB 323 with amendments. This bill is a common sense policy aimed to preserve access to law enforcement and emergency services. Tenants should always have avenues available to them to address things like domestic violence, elder abuse, and other offenses that occur on a repeat basis. On this matter, our counties are in agreement. Issues arise, however, when an individual potentially overextends law enforcement and emergency services to address issues concerning parking enforcement or neighborly disputes involving minor nuisances. Local jurisdictions should have some discretion whether to respond to a fifth call concerning an unfounded complaint of a dog barking at night. Our offered amendment would modify HB 323 to require local jurisdictions respond to any calls concerning a crime included in the Maryland criminal law article, leaving some discretion regarding local ordinances which often relate to very low-level offenses, dog barking included. Understanding the need to balance tenant access to law enforcement and emergency services and the need to protect these services from being overextended, we urge the adoption of HB 323 with amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. David Prater, please.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is David Prater. I'm a managing attorney at Disability Rights Maryland. We are testifying favorable with amendments that we have already spoken with Delegate Carr about. That amendment would include crisis services under Maryland's Health General Article. So essentially, we are favorable for this bill with the delegate's sponsor amendment. For all of the reasons that you've already heard, we support this bill as a significant civil rights issue for people with disabilities. I do just want to highlight that currently in Maryland, almost all Maryland jurisdictions use police-based crisis services. So to penalize tenants who use crisis services, tenants with disabilities, represents a disparate impact and disproportionately affects people with disabilities, particularly those of color. So we are in favor of this bill that would prohibit those practices by local jurisdictions and prohibit evictions by landlords for utilizing essential crisis services and other emergency services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions now, Delegate Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, Mr. Nibbard, have you discussed your amendments with the sponsor? Because it seems reasonable, but I didn't know if there's a reason why they want to include local ordinances.
I couldn't speak specifically, but I have spoken to Delegate Polakovich-Carr, and I think the conversation is still ongoing, and I do appreciate the ongoing dialogue with the delegate.
And I would suggest that when you do talk to her again, that perhaps this amendment from the Disability Rights Maryland folks is included in your conversation, because I can already foresee an ordinance dealing with access to something regarding home that may not be in the criminal law, but may be in the local ordinances that we want to make sure we protect and shouldn't stop people from calling if somebody is denying somebody access because of their disability. So just be aware of that when you're trying to work that all out.
Are there further questions for the panel? Seeing none, we thank you all very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 323. We're now going to move to House Bill 349, and this is Delegate Moon's bill. We'll hear from Delegate Moon, Marceline White, Aja Mallory, Isadora Stern, although I know now Marceline White is not going to be with us, actually. Hope she's recovering well. So Aja Mallory, Isadora Stern, Nicole Hansen, Kathleen Highland, David Schley, Stephen Sakamoto Wengel. Okay, there are several. We're going to break this up. So we'll hear from Aja Mallory, Isadora Stern, Nicole Hansen Mundell, Faye Justice, and Kathleen Highland after Delegate Moon speaks for 2 minutes. So let's do that. And so we'll go to the vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, House Bill 349, this is a redo. It's identical to a bill we passed last year, and it basically stops the arrest or incarceration of people over small claims debts, which are under $5,000. And this is happening despite Maryland's Constitution banning incarceration for debt. And it does so by because people are allowing arrests for missing proceedings related to the debt. This was the Attorney General's bill last year, and we passed it in a bipartisan vote in the Judiciary Committee. It was on the floor where it passed with a veto-proof supermajority. And if it doesn't refresh your memory yet, this was the bill where we heard tales of a resident in Montgomery County being arrested over HOA fees, and they had not even received notice of the proceedings. And some of the disputes in Prince George's were over as little as $329. So the creditors bar even agrees that this is not needed. But there's a lot of people who can tell you additional details, so I will leave the rest to them. So thank you, colleagues.
All right, Aja Mallory, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Klimperger and members of the committee. My name is Asia Mallory, the Consumer Staff Attorney at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, where we connect volunteer attorneys to low-income Marylanders. We respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 349. The majority of our clients with body attachments come to us through our Human Trafficking Prevention Project. They are often our most vulnerable of clients. The threat of arrest and the possibility of spending a few hours at a detention center is terrifying to my clients. Most importantly, the financial impact on their life. A few hours detained would result in lost wages, possibly a loss in employment, and if bail is set, another debt incurred. Body attachments often do nothing more than push people into further cyclical poverty or create a new range of problems for them. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Isadora Stern, please.
Hello again, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Isadora Stern, here with the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. Thank you so much, Vice Chair Moon, for sponsoring this important legislation, and to all of you who passed this bill in committee last year. I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said. I think the most important thing here is that the bill would make true Maryland's Constitution that says no person shall be imprisoned for debt. This bill is an important step in limiting the criminalization of poverty. Even though there is a prohibition on debtors' prisons, there are still body attachments that have been issued. And as Vice Chair Moon said, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, a woman in Montgomery County was arrested in jail despite never receiving notice of her court date. So this policy was supported by Attorney General Frosch's COVID-19 task force and is supported by the creditors bar, who agree that this practice is outdated and no longer necessary for them to pursue repayment. So in short, there is widespread support for this ending this practice, and I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicole Hanson-Mundell, please, for 1 minute. She was there. Nicole Hanson-Mundell. I see her. All right, we will skip her and we'll come right back. Kathleen Highland, please.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members of the committee again. I'm here again on behalf of the National Association of Consumer Advocates, strongly urging a favorable report. We submitted testimony last year as well, and I believe that this bill it was on the list to be voted on right before the session ended due to COVID time constraints, but we had a lot of favorable support for it. I just wanted to briefly mention in my testimony that identity theft is such an emerging issue these days, and we're getting more and more calls with people who are victims of data breaches and identity theft issues who have had judgments entered against them, but at the perpetrator's address, not at their address. So if a body attachment is issued, it can go after the wrong person. We believe that in addition to everything else all the other panelists are talking about, this is too extreme of a remedy and not necessary, especially in light of the dangers people are facing these days with data breaches and identity theft. So thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
All right, let's try again. Nicole Hanson-Mundell, please. Nicole Hanson-Mundell. All right, is David Schlee here? All right, I think I was going to hold him off because there are still some more people to talk anyway. So we'll keep looking for Nicole Hanson-Mundell, but we'll take her on the second panel. We'll take questions now. Delegate Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this question's for Ms. Stern. I mean, you referred to debtors' prisons a while ago, and you know that we don't want to be locking people up, of course, because they owe a debt. But when body attachments are issued in collections cases, it's not because they owe a debt, it's because they have shirked their responsibility to appear in connection with an oral exam or some kind of action in aid of enforcement for a a judgment creditor to try to obtain information. Isn't that right?
I could speak a little bit to this. I think actually Kathleen Highland could speak better to it as a lawyer, but when body attachments are issued, it allows law enforcement to pursue that person's body. So a lot of the times, and we're seeing this have a disparate impact on Black residents in Maryland, because they can be pulled over on the road in their cars because their license shows up as them owing a debt to the state. So, and because of the disproportionate policing of Black bodies, this is affecting communities disproportionately. I would encourage you to ask this question maybe to Kathleen also, who could speak better to the legal proceedings.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, and David Schley is in the waiting room right now. He's waiting to be let in. He just texted, but he had taught us all last year that the process of using post-judgment methods in aid of enforcement, like post-judgment interrogatories, was becoming a thing of the past, because now the creditors are using high-volume search tools that are connected to innovative technologies to find the people's assets, and they're mostly skipping that process of filing the post-judgment interrogatories in court. So It could be related to what you're saying, but I just fall back on what happens.
I mean, I've done some creditors' rights actions in the past. I've also represented debtors. And, in the typical scenario that we see, a judgment's already been entered against folks, and folks either get served with interrogatories in aid of enforcement of judgment, or some kind of oral exam so that they can produce information for the judgment creditor to find out what, if any, assets these folks have that they can, execute on to collect their judgment. And when folks, ignore their obligations, I guess, to do those things, it's only then, well after the judgment's been entered, that a body attachment gets issued, right?
Yeah, Delegate, I agree with your position. I'm just saying that, is taking away their basic human liberty going to get that creditor paid? Because they already have the ability to use search technology to garnish bank accounts. So they're likely not going to end up with the money that they seek, and they'll have expended more costs in the process.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Are there further questions for this first panel?
Mr. Chair.
I see you. We'll take you in the next panel, and we'll call you first. So stay right there. So that concludes the questions for this panel. We'll now go on to the next panel of witnesses in favor of the legislation, including Nicole Hanson-Mundell, David Schley, Stephen Sakamoto Wengel, Christopher Dews. And I think Cody Drinkwater also is listed as a favorable witness, but we'll see if they are there. So go ahead, Nicole Hanson-Mundell, now for 1 minute, please.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee members. My name is Nicole Hanson-Mundell. I am the Executive Director of Out for Justice, an organization that advocates and are represented by individuals impacted by the criminal legal system. It is the very members that I represent who are most impacted by debtors' prisons. Creditors are circumventing the laws. We've said, by obtaining these court judgments and using court systems to put debtors in jail, and that, they don't appear in court or pay their debts. And so there are a lot of reasons why debtors, may fail to appear in court or respond to court orders, thereby leading to an arrest. So there's court processing areas that lead to debtors not receiving notice, or notice sent to the wrong address, or the debt is unrecognizable to the debtor because it has been bought or sold, right? Debtors are accused of debts they don't even owe. Debtors have already paid off some debt, but collectors attempt to collect.
Okay, it appears that she's frozen. All right. If people have questions.
My recent poverty report in 2018. And so thank you so much for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to David Schley.
Thank you, Chairman. David Schley again for the Maryland DC Creditors Bar. And as stated earlier, we were in favor of this bill last year. We're also in favor of this bill this year. We also worked with the AG's office in trying to put this bill together. I understand some of the concerns of the delegates. I will tell you that the majority of our clients, which are large banks and large debt purchasers, they have all stopped this process years ago, primarily because of the bad PR involved with picking someone up on a $500 or $600 debt and then having them get lost in the system, or you can't find them, or you find out the case is bad. So everyone had stopped this, which is kind of an old 20-year-old process of doing post-judgment interrogatories. The other thing I would like to mention to everybody is that it's only for debts under $5,000. So for people that are more than that, this process is still in place. For those reasons, and again, like as everybody said, I'm here to answer any questions, but we have a favorable position on this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Stephen Sakamoto Wengel, please.
Good afternoon, Steve Sakamoto Wengel on behalf of the Attorney General's Office. I'm here in support of House Bill 349. Again, this was a recommendation from the Attorney General's task force, as well as an issue that the Attorney General himself had sponsored when back when he was in the legislature. And this is really something that is outdated. It's not necessary anymore because there are alternative methods of finding out information. And it's just a total injustice to have somebody put in jail over a debt that's below the exemption limits anyway, and that they might not have to pay. So we believe that this is a practice whose time is over, should not be continued, and would urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Okay. Christopher Dews, please.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Dews, and I'm the Senior Policy Advocate of the Job Opportunities Task Force. Our mission, as always, is to help low-wage workers advance to higher-wage jobs. We support House Bill 349 as a means of decriminalizing poverty and just ensuring, that those who are lower income don't find themselves incarcerated for debts. According to a 2018 report by the ACLU, 1 in 3 Americans has a debt that was referred to a private debt collection agency. And as you may have heard last year, University of Maryland Carey School of Law did a study examining these issues and found that from 2015, January to December of 2020, Maryland judges issued at least 760 body attachments for creditors against debtors, disproportionately targeting lower income persons of color. The top 20 zip codes that had the highest number of body attachments were 81% persons of color with a median household income of $49,000 a year, way less than Maryland's national average. So we just see this idea of using this type of tool when you have other arguments that's already been said, like wage garnishments, as a method of it's just a little too harsh for what's trying to become accomplished. I understand the idea of trying to collect the debt, but the idea of somebody being incarcerated for that said debt because they cannot afford it for amounts that are so small, we just don't think is an effective tool to be used, and it targets people of color and targets those who are disproportionately poor. For those reasons, we urge a favorable report, and I thank you all for listening.
All right, are there questions for the panel? Delegate McComas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question. I know you talked about a lot of access that different professional debt collection agencies have, that they can track assets of the defendant or the debtor. I think what you're not looking at is you're looking at folks that may have, I'll just use a rental property or something, and they depend upon the income, and they're senior citizens, and they don't have maybe the sophistication or the desire to have to hire a firm, and that would take a portion of what the debt is owed to them. So we're going to kind of cut them out here. And I guess because basically that would allow the debtor to come for the oral exams and everything, and we're kind of cutting that out. And so basically you're trying to help one group, but you're penalizing, let's say, the older, less sophisticated kind of what do I want to say? Just kind of the different folks that don't care to, engage with lawyers and debt collectors and all that. So I guess, you're cutting out a certain kind of people that would maybe rather use that or that threat of that. So I wondered if you could comment on that.
Was that a question for? I can answer that. This is David Schley. That was a question for me, Delegate McCombs?
Yeah, go ahead. You
Okay.
are fine.
So, Delegate,
yeah,
I understand that, Delegate McCombs, but understand also that if they're a business and I think it's under $1,500, they will have to hire an attorney to even represent them in that case. So, yeah, you're talking about a very small minority, and I understand. If it's a private citizen with a private they don't have an attorney and they're going after somebody, they won't have the same tools. But I also think that is a very small minority. And again, if it's under, I believe it's $1,500, you have to still get an attorney to represent you, even if you're a landlord business.
If you have a follow-up, you're being muted. You're muted, Delegate McComas.
Okay, I'm just not aware of that, sir. I know that if you're a corporation, you have to have an attorney, but if it's a small claim, I don't understand why you would need to do that. Have to hire an attorney.
Yeah, you're right. I'm only discussing corporations, but I'm in court a lot, in district court. I very, very seldom see private actions by single individuals that don't involve corporations, and doing that most of the time they will hire attorneys.
Well, I think if you go in the more rural counties and rural jurisdictions, you're going to find that there's more folks that prefer to do it themselves than, let's say, the metropolitan areas. I just think that that's part of it. But
understand.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Cham.
Thank you, Chair. The question I have is, prior to matters getting to the seriousness of possible incarcerating someone due to a debt, is there an average amount of time that the person was contacted to settle the debt, like 6 months, 10 attempts? Are those data anywhere known, as far as how much time does a person have to settle this debt before it reaches potential incarceration?
I will take a shot at that, if that's a question for me. So if you look through the process, and now after post-COVID, you're not going to get to this process till at least a year to a year and a half. And during that time, depending on who it is, they would have had multiple notices. They would have been served. They would have gotten other information. So, and if you're in one of the counties that's pretty far behind right now, you should be talking about 3 years.
All right. Are there further questions? Seeing none, we thank you all very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 349. We thank you all very much for coming and speaking with us today. Now, we have House Bill 425. This is a significant bill. It is a bill that has been before the committee before, and I think it's important to remind members of the committee that we're going to be joined by witnesses today who have, in some cases, have firsthand experience with gun violence. After our first panel provides testimony and answers your questions, we will hear from a series of guests who are either minors or survivors of gun violence, or both. I'm asking members of the committee to be respectful in the questions that you ask, and to please not exhibit weapons during the hearing while these guests join us and while we hear the testimony on this bill. With that, this is House Bill 425. This is Delegate Lopez's bill. And we are going to hear from the Attorney General Frosch for 3 minutes, We're going to hear from, well, I'm sorry, no, we're not. We're going to hear from Delegate Lopez, I think, is on the first panel as well, if I'm not mistaken, because I have 400 pieces of paper. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. We are going to hear from the Attorney General first, then Delegate Lopez, then Mayor Brandon Scott. Then we're also going to hear from Commissioner Michael Harrison, and then Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. The Attorney General and Delegate Lopez will each get 3 minutes. Then the mayor, everybody else on the panel will get 2 minutes. So with that, is the Attorney General on? I don't see him yet. There's the Attorney General.
I'm here.
All right, that's fine. We will hear from you for 3 minutes, then Delegate Lopez for 3 minutes, and then we'll go from there. All right, the Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'm going to try to do this very quickly. Ghost guns are guns without serial numbers. They're made from kits. They're sold widely over the internet, and they are an increasing threat to public safety because of 2 trends. First, they are increasingly used in crimes. Recoveries from crime investigations of ghost guns are up by orders of magnitude over just a couple of years. You'll hear from Commissioner Harrison and I think Chief Aziz from Prince George's County and other law enforcement officers about the experiences that they've had in their jurisdiction. But I'll just give you one example, and I'm stealing a little bit of Commissioner Harrison's thunder here, perhaps. Last summer, Baltimore City narcotics raid resulted in the seizure of 15 ghost guns and an additional 40 polymer 80 kits. Those are ghost gun kits. The ghost guns are becoming the guns of choice for criminals. The second trend that is extremely disturbing is kids are getting them. And they're using them. I think you've probably all seen the news from a couple of weeks ago. Magruder High School in Montgomery County, 17-year-old is accused of shooting a 15-year-old in the school with a ghost gun. Last year, a 14-year-old was accused of killing a 20-year-old with ghost gun. So why are they so popular all of a sudden? Simple answer. They're easy to get. There's an adage, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Well, if you're a kid that has access to a credit card, you can get a kit you can put together, assemble into a weapon. If you're a violent felon who can't qualify to get a handgun permit in our state, you can get one of these kits or 40 of these kits, and you have all the weapons you need to continue your violent criminal activity. There's no background check for these kits. It's simply you pay the money, you get the kit. They're easy to assemble. The manufacturers advertise this. They're already 80% done, and manufacturers advertise they can be assembled in an hour or 2. And they cannot be traced. There are 10 states that have already outlawed ghost guns, as well as the District of Columbia. Our bill will treat these weapons as firearms. That's what they are. It'll close the loophole in Maryland law. It'll keep them out of the hands of children and of violent criminals. I urge you to take action and give this measure a favorable report. Be delighted to answer your questions.
Right. Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Delegate Leslie Lopez, here to ask for your favorable report on 425. This bill bans the sale and possession of unserialized firearms as defined by the ATF. These guns, often called ghost guns or polymer 80s, represent the fastest form of gun violence in our state and our country. You've heard versions of this bill in the past, and I'm proud to say that the draft today is the best yet. It comes after 4 years of collaboration across a broad coalition of partners. I'm particularly thankful to have the strong commitments of Speaker Jones and Attorney General Brian Frosh. Here's what the bill does and does not do. This bill bans serialized frames and receivers, cutting off the iron pipeline, which is the supply chain of untraceable firearms to prohibited people, namely felons, domestic abusers, and those who are underage. This bill does not end the hobby of homemade gunsmithing. It simply requires that manufacturers serialize what they sell. This bill does create uniformity across often technical and confusing gun laws. We have aimed to extend commonly accepted standards and not invent any new conventions for manufacturers or gun dealers. This bill also sets our state up to be fully aligned with new federal regulations that are expected to be enacted in the next few months. This bill does not make law-abiding gun owners criminals overnight. In fact, it offers a clear pathway with several options for hobbyists to make their homemade guns compliant. Ghost guns are real guns, and today you'll hear from people who know them firsthand, including law enforcement and national experts. A teen will tell you how easy it was for them to purchase a ghost gun online, and another teen will tell you what it was like at Magruder High School, when 2 doors down from where she sat, a classmate was shot. Since I last presented this bill, my district has become home to the first ghost gun homicide in Montgomery County. This past summer, a 15-year-old allegedly shot and killed Axel Trejo, who was just 21. Axel died trying to shield his brothers, who were 14 and 9 years old. He had just bought his first car and was working hard to save up for his first home. Axel was the type of young man we should all be proud to raise, and the woman who raised him, his mother Anna, will be speaking today with you. You're going to hear some brave testimony today, but the work before us as a committee is not particularly brave or risk-taking on this issue. This bill is simply common sense, and it is widely supported. Last week, the often conservative Frederick News Post editorial board called the bill's proposals eminently reasonable. The bottom line is that criminals know this loophole exists, and now we all know as well. And so, colleagues, I urge your favorable report on HB 425, a bill whose time has come.
All right, we'll go now to the mayor of the city of Baltimore, Brandon Scott, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Mayor Scott from Baltimore, joining in full support of HB 425. I want to thank Delegate Lopez and Attorney General Frost for sponsoring this bill and really appreciate their commitment to getting ghost guns off our streets. Ghost guns are a huge challenge for Baltimore City. Over 300 ghost guns were seized in the city in 2021, representing nearly 15% of all guns seized. And over the past 3 years, the number of ghost guns we are seeing on our streets has been growing each year, going from 30 in 2019 seized by BPD to 128 in 2020 and well over 300 in 2021. And as you heard from the Attorney General, we partnered last year with HSI to take down a firearm trafficker who had the ability to create 40 of these unserialized firearms. But takedowns are not enough. To effectively address this issue, we need this legislation and we need a ban. As long as people who are not legally allowed to possess a firearm, young people, known violent offenders, have the opportunity to obtain and build these tools of death and violence, we will continue to see it impact the safety on our streets. This legislation, if passed, would help all Maryland jurisdictions deal with the increasing uses of these untraceable guns in the commission of crimes. It shows that Maryland and all of its jurisdictions are working to get ahead of a growing and concerning trend. And this legislation shows that local and state governments can and will act on this issue. Statewide problems require statewide solutions. And we know that the majority of the weapons used in Baltimore come from outside the city and are not legally purchased firearms. In conjunction with this legislation, we will continue to work on our efforts to deal with gun trafficking. Firearms that do not have serial numbers or registrations have no place in our state. This is common sense legislation that demonstrates a commitment to keeping all Marylanders safe by holding those who use these guns and crimes accountable without penalizing hobbyists or legal gun owners. This sends a clear message to criminals in Baltimore or wherever in Maryland who use ghost guns that we are coming for them and not going to tolerate it. And for all of those reasons, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 425.
Thank you very much. For 2 minutes now, the Commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department, Michael Harrison.
Good afternoon. Chairman Clippinger, Vice Chair Moon, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak in favor of House Bill 425 today. I am certainly proud to stand with Mayor Brandon Scott to urge the adoption of this bill that will reduce the devastating impact of violence that has been experienced by Baltimore City residents. Over the last few years, as you heard from our mayor, Baltimore has seen a frightening increase in the number of ghost guns that have been seized in our city. In 2018, we only seized 12 ghost guns, but in 2021, we seized 345. That's a 2,775% increase. Unfortunately, this dangerous trend has continued into the current calendar year with no signs of letting up. So far this year, we've recovered 51 privately made firearms. In the same frame time last year, we only received 19. That means we are far outpacing last year, and at this rate, we're on pace to seize over 600 ghost guns this year. At least 13 of the ghost guns recovered this year were possessed by convicted felons. At least 17 of the ghost guns recovered this year were possessed along with a controlled dangerous substance, and 4 of them connect directly to violence through the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. I could spend hours telling you stories about how these ghost guns have hurt our community and made our streets unsafe, but I'll give you a few situations from last year. A 17-year-old male was observed carrying what officers believed to be a handgun in a violent area. He fled from the officers, discarded his book bag, which was found to contain a loaded polymer 9mm handgun. He was ultimately arrested, but he was not even old enough to purchase the handgun. Then officers observed a 20-year-old male displaying characteristics of an armed person in an area known for gang and drug activity. The officers made their approach, and after the investigation, recovered a large amount of cocaine and heroin and a polymer 9mm handgun. He was not old enough to legally purchase the handgun and was using the weapon to protect his large quantity of controlled dangerous substance that he was in possession of. Due to the lack of regulation, ghost guns have quickly become the weapon of choice for traffickers, for criminals, even young people who are out there carrying guns. And unless action is taken, I only expect this problem to get worse. Therefore, I urge a favorable report on this bill. All of our communities need and deserve these protections. And thank you for allowing me to speak to this important issue today.
Thank you very much. The Montgomery County Executive, Mark Elrich, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Clippinger and members of the committee, and for this opportunity to briefly speak to you in support of House Bill 425, which would basically ban ghost guns in Maryland. Gun violence is America's #1 public health issue, and like our pandemic response, we must take action to protect our residents from harm, which includes adopting a prohibition on ghost guns in Maryland. I applaud Maryland Attorney General Brian Frost for his pledge to have ghost guns banned in 2022. I want to recognize Delegate Leslie Lopez for her tireless commitment, now in its 5th year, 5 years too long, to sponsor strong legislation that will disrupt the supply of unregistered and untraceable lethal firearms that increasingly make their way onto our streets, our communities, and into our schools. Just in the process of doing a little bit of research, I found myself on mailing lists of innumerable companies offering me the ability to buy these kits so I could put them together myself and circumvent the laws that are intended to protect against the sale of guns, and watching an assembly video, they're not all that difficult to put together. In 2021, Montgomery County passed a law restricting possession, sale, and transfer and manufacture of ghost guns to minors within 100 yards of a place of public assembly, like a school, place of worship, or community center. A local gun law took effect on July 16th, but not before we were sued by gun rights organization claiming that we exceeded our jurisdiction's right to regulate these unregistered lethal weapons. The case is pending. We're not standing down. In fact, energized by the momentum in Annapolis to ban these weapons in 2022. Locally, too many ghost guns are getting into the hands of minors. We can't allow ourselves to become numb to gun violence and accept school shootings as inevitable. The recent shooting at Magruder High School of a 15-year-old student by a fellow 17-year-old student was disturbing and unacceptable. It was particularly egregious because the student used a handmade gun he was able to assemble from components he purchased online. It was the 5th ghost gun recovered from a Montgomery County school this year. That's not all the ghost guns we've acquired. Violent acts like this can and must be interrupted by adopting Bill 425, which will outlaw ghost guns in Maryland, and I urge the committee to adopt the favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have several questions. I'm going to ask as we begin this, we're fine with people asking follow-up questions. That's been what we've done on the committee. I'll just ask if we can stay focused and try not to engage in too many speeches prior to the questions. Questions would be nice. A little less, isn't that so, at the end would be particularly nice. And not targeted at any one person. Delegate Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions for a couple particular members of this panel who spoke. So first, for the Attorney General, why wouldn't we focus on prohibiting and severely punishing, I guess, the criminal construction, possession, use, transfer, etc., instead of targeting the object specifically? I mean, if a person isn't a prohibited person and isn't using the object in any type of illegal activity, I mean, why should they be punished because some nefarious folks are using these items for nefarious purposes?
Well, the reason is because these guns they're the guns of choice of criminals. We don't catch the criminals every time they get one of these guns. You heard Commissioner Harrison talk about the case that I mentioned as well, where they busted a drug organization in possession of 40 kits. Look, nobody buys something that's 80% assembled and makes a hobby out of putting 40 of them together. That's not a hobby, that's a business. And unfortunately, in this case, it's a business that's violent and dangerous and criminal. So that's why we're doing it the way we're doing it. If you're a law-abiding citizen and you want to get one of these, you can either buy the gun straight up, or if you really feel the need to put together the last 20%, a couple of screws here and there, the ATF will probably have regulations shortly that will allow you to do that. Get it serialized so we know where it came from, and you'll pass the background check that's required for every gun owner in the state of Maryland, every handgun owner in the state of Maryland, and you'll have your gun.
Well, just to follow up on that, Mr. Attorney General, so I mean, you anticipate that the ATF's going to adopt these regulations, I guess, sometime this year, I suppose. I mean, what happens if they don't adopt those regulations? What's going to be the impact on law-abiding citizens that already have these if the ATF doesn't take that action?
They have several options, as Delegate Lopez mentioned. They can, of course, dispose of the weapons, but they can sell them. There are still 40 states in which it's legal to possess these weapons, so you can sell them. And there is a third avenue where you can go to a federally licensed firearm dealer, an FFL, and get them to serialize it for you.
Okay, thank you. One follow-up, Mr. Chairman, for Commissioner Harrison, if I could.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, according to statistics that I've seen, there have been like 9,000 firearms that the Baltimore Police Department has confiscated in the last 4 years, I guess, since 2018. Do you have any idea how many of those confiscated firearms were traced, and how many of those instances did the trace identify the person from whom the firearm was confiscated to be a legal registered owner of said firearm? Do we have any idea?
Well, thank you for the question. We have some idea about some of the guns that are confiscated, either from being confiscated from a victim or confiscated from a perpetrator or seized in a search warrant or a traffic stop, whether they're ghost guns or whether they're traditional guns. And we, through the NIBIN, or the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network, can trace those guns to other crimes that were committed by those guns, and to some degree, the perpetrators who are using them when we catch them with that gun. So we have some of that information. I don't have those statistics at my disposal at this moment, but to some degree, we can trace those guns to other guns, to crimes, and to people. And many times we are able to trace when those guns change hands on the street from criminal to criminal. And that's what we want to make sure we're doing. We're able to track the guns, not just from the person who pulls the trigger, because that's important, but from who facilitated that person having that gun, all the way back to its origin. So I can't give you those numbers for all of that right now, but we have the technology and the expertise to track guns when we seize them and connect them to other crimes and sometimes to their origin. That's the goal here with ghost guns.
Yeah, if you could get us that information, Commissioner, we'd certainly appreciate it. But I guess specifically what I'm trying to drill down on is how many of those traced firearms were traced to the legal registered owner of those firearms. You know what I mean?
I don't have that information at this moment. That's something we can work on with my staff and get you the data that exists.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner.
Delegate Grammer, just an extra second to get back into his chair for his question. The next questions will be Delegates Grammer, Anderson, Cox, McComas, Erican. Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the Attorney General, and thanks for being here today. In his testimony, the mayor mentioned that many of the firearms that are used in crimes, they find to be not from here. And if you follow many of the criminal cases in the region, you will find that many of the guns are straw purchases from outside of the state. And when we passed the Firearm Criminalization Act in 2013, if you watch the testimony, which lasted several hours, we were told in the hearing for that bill that bill would be the solution for our problem with straw purchases. And it's similar to this bill in a couple ways, in that it criminalizes the ownership of firearms. And while that bill most certainly has not stopped criminals from straw purchases, either purchasing or transporting firearm, which are separate criminal charges, it has had some consequences. And that is, and this tends to be a major concern, is that people get wrapped up in police issues because the ownership of certain firearms becomes a crime. And specifically, I'm mentioning the situation in Duncan Lemp, in Montgomery County. The charge against him was that he allegedly owned a firearm that was on a list that made it a crime to own. That was found not to be the case, but he received a warrant for his arrest. A no-knock warrant was issued in Montgomery County, and he was shot to death in a no-knock warrant. And that tends to be the concern with a lot of people, a lot of Marylanders about bills like this, is that this bill, it doesn't overnight make it a crime to own one of these firearms, but like the bill from 2013 did, it happens slowly then quickly. And then one day you wake up and you might be on a list for allegedly violating a crime just for owning a firearm. So can you answer for me why it is necessary in this particular bill to have a criminal penalty associated with just owning one of these firearms, which makes you subject to the issuance of a warrant, the issuance of a no-knock warrant, and quite frankly, could put you in front of police?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. And let me go back to the premise of your question about the Firearm Safety Act of 2013. You point to the fact that most of the guns now that are recovered in crimes in Maryland or here illegally come from out of state. And that's largely because of the Firearm Safety Act of 2013. It's because it's now very difficult in Maryland, unless you're buying or trading a ghost gun, it's very difficult to get a serialized firearm from a straw purchaser in the state of Maryland. The person who buys it has to be qualified, has to pass background checks, has to have some training. And if somebody goes in and obtains one of those guns and transfers it to somebody who's a violent felon, then they're liable for they've committed a crime. So it has dried up to a certain extent the straw purchases that occurred in our state for decades. And I'm not saying there aren't anymore. There still are, but it's easier to get a gun from out of state than it is to get one in state if you're a violent felon, if you're not qualified to obtain a handgun qualification license. So if you're comparing the Firearm Safety Act to this proposal, it's all good. I mean, it's done in large part what needs to be done. The problem is we're surrounded by states that don't have similar laws. And so crime guns filter across our borders from Pennsylvania and Virginia and other places where it's easier to get them, where you don't have to pass a serious background check. So why is it necessary to do what we're doing? And I mean, I think the answer you've heard several times. We know that criminals are buying these guns and they're buying more and more of them because it's easy to get their hands on. They don't have to go to an FFL, a federally licensed firearms dealer. They can just go on the internet and buy one if they got a credit card. And the same is true of children. I mean, the idea that a 14-year-old can get a ghost gun, a gun that can't be traced over the internet is outrageous. If you have a very simple test, the one we have in Maryland for all other guns, and really that's all we're doing here is we're saying, you know, these unserialized ghost guns are going to be treated the same way we treat any other gun. Just because you got to take an hour to put it together doesn't mean that you can get one if you're a violent felon or if you're a kid. So that's the reason why it's a crime. And I hope it does have the same impact that the Firearm Safety Act 2013 has.
I get, you know, I understand at least your purview about the sale and making an industry of it, but why is the possession of it? Why is it necessary to have the ownership of it a crime? Because the consequences are obvious.
Well, why is it necessary to have an unserialized gun? If you're a handgun enthusiast, why do you need to have one that's not serialized?
Well, respectfully, Mr. Attorney General, we're supposed to ask the questions here. And as a matter of policy, as a matter of policy, it is clear that every attempt to make the ownership of a gun a crime you know, as an attempt to enhance public safety, it has not lived up to the case.
I disagree. I mean, I think, in fact, you stated the case when you said that most of the guns in Maryland that are recovered in crimes are coming from out of state. That's the reason why, because we have tough handgun licensing laws.
I'd like to make one final question for the mayor, if I can, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, thanks for being here today. We wish you well and we need you to succeed. I do have a question for you. There was an article a few months ago which spoke to the ability of the city to process forensic evidence from crime scenes. There was a whistleblower in the agency who pointed out the fact that Baltimore City was not processing evidence from approximately 50% of your crime scenes. And the number he quoted, he said, you know, if there are 10,000 cases where we're not processing evidence properly, it wouldn't shock him at all. So my question today, you know, and I respect you being here to advocate for a bill you support, but how do you expect to effectively enforce this law if we're not processing crime scene evidence in the totality of the criminal cases that you have in Baltimore City?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. And what I will start off by saying is that I would characterize what you read as a serious overreach, but also be reminded that we are under a federal consent decree where all of those kind of things are being analyzed, not just by us, but by our monitor and a federal judge. But most importantly, when you're talking about guns, which we are talking about here today, we have one of, if not the best gun trace shops in the country. This is how we've been working with our partners in our region and around the state to track these weapons down. This is how we know we were the first to have this one of its kind, which is one of its kind right now, data portal, where we're working with our firearms intelligence unit to track down these weapons to where they came from, as you heard from the commissioner, what kind of crimes they've been used in, who bought it originally, how the hands have been exchanging. We do this consistently. This is how we've been working to increase our closure rates for homicides and non-fatal shootings by 6% last year. Actually, our non-fatal clearance rate was higher than the national average. We manage our evidence. We go after our evidence specifically when you're talking about gun and violent crime, which we will continue to do. And if I could, Mr. Chair, I'll let the commissioner expand upon the works and the efforts around what we're doing with our forensic labs and others.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Real quickly, that the issue you brought up about our forensics team, that was investigated. What we found is that there were things that were not being processed, but didn't have a requirement for it to be processed. For example, if there's a sexual assault with a known offender who confessed to it or either said that it was consensual, there probably wasn't a need to do an assessment of it or a forensic analysis because we knew who the other person was. And so there are many cases like that, but that has been fully investigated. It has been fully adjudicated. And we actually had a hearing in front of our city council where it was aired out and we got to the bottom of it. But we do have a nationally accredited crime lab that's one of the most robust in all of America.
So just for clarification, you think that article and the concern was overstated and that you've taken care of that problem?
What I can say is that it has been fully investigated. We've had our consent decree monitors, the Department of Justice, all looking into it, along with having a hearing in front of our entire city council. It has been brought to an adjudication. The explanations were given, and their satisfaction we've come to satisfaction on what was done, why it was done, and how it met procedural guidelines.
Delegate, I'll just close by saying that without getting into details, it is not uncommon for other jurisdictions in the state to send guns to Baltimore City for us to trace them to find out where they're coming from. We have the best and we'll continue to have the best.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll go now to Delegate Anderson, then Cox, McComas, Erican, and Shetty. Delegate Anderson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I do want to thank, as others have, Delegate Lopez for continually bringing this bill forward and putting together a fairly awesome panel today, led by obviously the Attorney General, but our great Mayor of Baltimore City, Brandon Scott, our Police Commissioner, Michael Harrison, and the County Executive of Montgomery County. I mean, these are folks that will help change and maybe bring this thing to a close. My only concern with the bill is that I'm not sure. Okay, I understand the concern that folks have about the possession of the gun, and I'm for that 100%. These guns should not be possessed; they shouldn't be sold. And in the bill, it basically says, and Attorney General, this is my question to you, on page 5, line 5, a person may not purchase, receive, sell, offer to sell, or transfer an unfinished frame, etc. Does that include the manufacturers who offer these guns for sale or offer these frames for sale on the internet?
Yes. So in other words, your Polymer 80 or any other manufacturer, you may not sell it in our state unless it's been serialized.
Okay, and can we effectively apprehend and prosecute people who or companies that do this if they're in Germany or wherever?
Well, there are ways to, we'd have a tough time getting them in front of a criminal court, but yes, there are ways. We have what are called long arm statutes. You're a lawyer, you know about it.
Right.
But if somebody commits a crime in the state of Maryland, even if they're doing it from Germany or even if they're doing it from a sister state, our courts have jurisdiction over them. It's tough to get them here. Sometimes you have to get them, sent or detained in a foreign country and then sent to the United States. But yes, we can enforce the laws against folks who are selling these guns, whether they're doing it from down the street or across the country or even across the world.
And I know Congress is working on the same thing. Ghost Guns Are Guns Act, I think it's called. What's the status of that?
I don't know where that bill stands. I do know that the AFT's regulations are moving forward and may be finished within a couple of months, and it would be good to pass legislation to enshrine it in U.S. law as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Delegate Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Real quickly, the bill that's being presented states anything antique built before 1899, that's under 4-201 of the criminal article, is not required to be serialized.
Correct.
Pre-1899. And then it also says that other guns pre-1968 do not have to be serialized. So are you saying that somebody could possibly go to jail for a flintlock made in 1900, but yet a machine gun that was made in 1950 is not serialized? They would not go to jail, or not a machine gun, but a semi-auto would not. In other words, a flintlock, somebody who just accidentally possesses a 1900 flintlock would potentially go to 10 years in jail if it was made in 1900. Is that the case under this bill?
Well, I mean, I don't think we're talking about long guns and serialization generally. I mean, look, there are assault weapons that are banned in Maryland, but most rifles, shotguns, and other guns, long guns people have in their possession are often not serialized, depending on how old they are, and not necessarily illegal. But it's hard to hide one in your waistband or in your jacket, and certainly if it's flintlock, it's a very inefficient gun to try to commit a crime with. And I do not believe that this bill will have any impact whatsoever on the legal ownership of those weapons.
Well, whether or not a prosecutor decides to go after someone with a flintlock in 1900, the bill actually says that, though, if it's,
no,
as you said, it's 1899 and before, correct?
Yeah, the bill takes the definition of antique firearm that's already in Maryland law and makes clear that that's an exception to this measure. But
how could that be equal protection, though, since it allows for other firearms pre-1968? So you got a difference. I'm sorry.
If someone is unmuted, I need you to be muted again. Okay, sorry about that. Delegate Cox, ask your question again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doesn't that seem, Mr. Attorney General, to have a due process or equal protection concern there, since the antique statute says 1899, but yet this law is trying to say that anything 1968 or before, pre-1968. So you have a problem with antique firearms that are made, replicas, for instance, 1900 to 1968. You could get charged with a crime under this statute if under this bill, if it passes.
No, you won't. I mean, if it exempts antique firearms, and I'm now looking for the provision that you're talking about 1968.
It's in definitions. Yeah, it's definition of an antique firearm.
If I may,
Okay, yeah.
the short answer to your question, Delegate, is no. Anything made before 1968 is exempted. And there's a federal law about antique guns where 1968 is the threshold. So we are codifying what's in federal regulation.
That's exactly right.
So to follow, I think there's a question there, but let me follow up on the 1968 rule. In federal law, from January 1st, 68 to 12/15/68, there was no serialization requirement. It was actually enacted and passed as of December 15th. So you're going to criminalize people that own guns in 1968 since the statute says pre-1968?
No.
So is that a fix that would need to be done?
No.
The statute, I mean, the bill as presented says pre-1968. So that would require.
The bill just adopts the existing law about antique firearms.
I'm talking
it
about. It
doesn't change anything with respect to firearms.
I don't think you're following. I don't think you're following me. I'm talking about the 1968 provision, not the antique provision.
Yeah, well, the 1968 provision is not in the bill per se. You have to go to section, let's see, 4201 of the criminal law article. But if you have a gun that was an antique firearm before this bill was passed, it's still an antique firearm. It doesn't make old long guns, especially, violations of the law. And I mean, unless you can give a specific example of something other than a gun that was, the flintlock that was built in 1900, I don't understand the question.
Let me move on then to my next question, since was lack of clarity on that one. A person, an individual in Maryland, including thousands who actually make these homemade firearms, would become required under the act to serialize them after this passes, correct?
Correct.
So you're going to make thousands of law-abiding citizens potentially fall outside the law and become criminals under this act, just because they exercise their Second Amendment right to build. And I'm asking this because earlier, I think your testimony, or maybe it was the mayor's, someone's testimony stated that this bill protects law-abiding citizens and you're focusing instead on illegal traffickers, but that's actually not the effect, correct?
Everybody who owns an unserialized gun that they made from a kit will they'll have several different choices. They can sell it, they can dispose of it, they can get it serialized. So they've got a series of choices. They don't become criminals automatically. They have until January 1, 2023 to make a choice.
And after that date, they're criminals. So if they fail to find a FFL that will provide them with a registration number and imprint that into the receiver, they become a criminal under this bill.
If they hang on to it and they decide not to, or to get it serialized, then yes, they need to get rid of it.
Would you agree that that could be thousands of Marylanders?
I don't know how many it would be, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were. I mean, look, I think, let me just put it this way. I think that by a year from now, people who own these guns will find a way to get them serialized or to sell them. So I don't think it's going to make many law-abiding people criminals. I think people have a responsibility to deal with the unserialized weapons that they already have and possess today. But they've got options to avoid any criminal liability.
And since, Mr. Attorney General, since there could be thousands in Maryland, you would agree that therefore this law would impact guns built and that are in the common use under Heller, correct?
No, I mean, look, First of all, I disagree with your suggestion that this will affect thousands of people. I don't think that most people who own these guns are going to choose to just keep them and not get them serialized. So, I mean, could there be somebody who doesn't get the message? Possibly. But I doubt that law-abiding folks are going to do anything to cause themselves to be subject to criminal liability.
But do you believe, Mr. Attorney General, that the 14th Amendment in our constitutional structure of government requires a mens rea in order to find criminal intent?
The 14th Amendment? No, not per se.
14th Amendment in our constitutional system requires a mens rea.
Where do you get that? What part of the 14th Amendment are you talking about?
Well, let me ask you it this way. Do you believe in mens rea, a criminal intent, as a protection under the Constitution from criminal liability, generally speaking?
In many statutes, there is intent, or mens rea is required. And in many criminal statutes, it's not. And I'll give you an example. Reckless driving, manslaughter doesn't require intent. It just requires reckless activity. So yeah, mens rea is an important component of many crimes.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually debated heavily in this committee in terms of strict liability crimes, especially on reckless driving issues. And so my question then is, how would you characterize this bill? You would characterize this as a strict liability crime bill?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a difference between recklessness and strict liability. Recklessness it's not strict liability, it's recklessness.
This would be worse.
But here, if somebody decides or fails to take action that's required by this bill, they can get in trouble. Yes. I mean, if the guy who had those 40 kits had just stowed them away and hung on to them until January 1st, 2023 without getting them serialized, he could get in a lot of trouble.
And that could include a block of aluminum, correct?
I don't know what you mean.
Well, lowers tend to be, blocks of aluminum without holding up any weapons, as the chairman has requested. The lower receivers that you're trying to criminalize are about, this big apparently. Yep. And they are blocks of aluminum. So what if somebody had
blocks of aluminum? They've got moving parts.
Well, actually, I think the bill doesn't specify that, does it? It doesn't require a moving part. In fact, it just is
it's a receiver. I don't know how you shoot a gun that doesn't have a trigger. Maybe you can explain that to me, but I've never heard of such a thing.
Well, I'm asking you about the bill because it doesn't say that. I mean, if you want to amend the bill to do that, that'd be certainly helpful. But let me ask you this. So in terms of, this is my last question, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Built versus stolen, then right now you would agree that it's 10 years under this bill for jail if someone's arrested under a strict law. In other words, no intent to do any wrong, but they could face, a law-abiding Marylander, thousands or hundreds, however you characterize it. They could face 10 years if this bill passes, 10 years in jail, correct?
It's 3 years and a $10,000 fine. And
so
that's...
So it's a 3-year, okay, and that's a first offense. What's the total if somebody had several of these in their possession? Each
three years per.
Okay, so 3 years and a $10,000 fine.
Yeah.
But we're looking at, let's say, the way they're caught is somebody in the BPD or as the mayor was discussing, catches someone. It was stolen from somebody who just didn't have any criminal intent. He just didn't put the serial number on his gun. It was stolen. And that person who stole it and who committed the crime with the gun by theft and doing whatever he's doing, trafficking, that person under a stolen gun would look at 30 days in jail, but the innocent law-abiding person would face 3 years in jail.
No. If you have a kit or you have a gun that you've put together and somebody steals it from you, you're not liable for that theft. And
I'm not talking about. Yeah, no, I'm talking about the person being criminalized, as Mr. Mayor pointed out, they're picking up a few of these on the streets. So you find the guy they're getting them from, they happen to have stole it from him. And his crime under this bill is that he didn't put the serial number on it. He didn't have any intent to do any wrong. He just didn't go back. Maybe he built this thing 10 years ago and forgot to put the serial number on it, but he's looking at 3 years in jail. But the guy who stole it's looking at 30 days, right?
No, neither of those is true. I mean, look, first of all, the big problem with these is that they're untraceable. So if you steal a gun without a serial number, how are you going to prove that somebody else owned it? And
So
once
what's the
you
point of the
find,
bill?
and if you find the person who owned it, how are you going to prove that he failed to get it serialized in time?
So then,
It was stolen after January 1, 2023. It's not a hypothetical that makes a lot of sense. But the guy who steals a handgun from him, I'm not sure what the penalty is, but I know it's more than 30 days. And especially if the person steals a handgun and uses it in a crime, it's worth a lot more than 30 days. There are mandatory minimums of 5 years, and depending on what crime it is the person uses it in,
Well, theft under
a lot more than that.
Well, right, Mr. Trainer, theft under 1,500 is 30 days, I believe. But in any case, you just said that therefore there's no way to hold that person liable. So I would rest on that I don't see a purpose for the bill.
That's not what I said. But I understand why you might think there's no reason for the bill.
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to get at what you meant by that, because if there's no.
What I meant is the whole problem with these guns is they're untraceable. So somebody steals an untraceable gun, how are they going to trace it back to the guy you stole it from?
So what's the point of the bill then? I'm trying to figure that out.
Because companies are selling thousands of them into our state to people who shouldn't have them. That's the problem.
But that doesn't necessarily criminalize the company or the person who's building the gun. I mean, they have no intent for wrongdoing. It's also this will remain lawful in other states likely. So, but anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Delegate McComas, then Eric Hand, then Shetty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was hoping maybe to talk to Chief Harrison, but he's not here. So I'll kind of direct this to either Attorney General Frosch or Mayor Scott, or anybody else that can answer the question. Both you and I, Attorney General Frosch, were around in 2013.
Yes.
And we were part of that, those long hearings, you and JPR and myself and Judiciary. So the 2013 omnibus gun control bill was supposed to solve crime, correct? I mean, that was the intent. We wanted to stop all of the bad things, the crime.
We did.
So in 2013, there were a total of 388 homicides. Now, obviously, the proof in the pudding is if it worked. Well, now we have, as of 2021, we have 662 homicides, total homicides. So the trend line is going up. It's not going down. It never went down. Same way with the shootings as well. So I guess what I'm kind of asking you is, do you think how is this bill going to put a dent in all these murders and shootings that we're having around the state?
Well, Delegate McComas,
because the omnibus crime bill didn't do it.
Well,
we're moving on up.
The fact that murders have gone up doesn't prove that. There are thousands of factors that go into the number of murders and murders committed by firearms in our state. And I would make the argument that if we hadn't passed that bill, we'd be a lot worse off than we are now. We'd have assault weapons on the street. We'd have many more handguns on the street. They'd be in the hands of criminals, and you would see a lot more bloodshed than you're seeing now. We're seeing way too much. And if it's any measure, you should consider the number of guns that are in private hands in the United States across the board. It's gone way up since 2013, way up. And,
But our population
and that's
hasn't
why.
increased. In fact,
I'm
we've
sorry.
lost, the state of Maryland's lost.
All right, wait a
population.
minute, wait a minute. It's been, we've done pretty well. We're going to let people answer the questions before we ask the next ones. So I'm going to ask the Attorney General to finish his answer, and then I'm going to ask Delegate McComas to begin her next question.
Yeah, I think I made my point, Delegate.
That's fine. Delegate McComas. And
Mr.
then,
Chair.
okay, I'm sorry. The mayor, if you want to respond to that first question, that's fine. We'll
Yes,
do
sir.
that, and then we'll go back to Delegate McComas. The mayor.
And very quickly, Delegate McComas, what I would say to you is that one, there was 2014, actually, there was a significant decrease. And for us in the city, it's like the second lowest year on record. But more importantly, for me, this is not, I don't look at any particular legislation as an end all be all. This is about another tool in the toolkit to fight those who are bringing gun violence to the streets of Baltimore or across Maryland, right? This, in addition to the things that we talk with the governor about increasing our warrant service and making sure that we're holding people responsible who we catch with gun crimes, right? We've already seized over 200 guns on the streets of Baltimore this year. This, in addition to the work with the bills that we talked about yesterday, earlier this week with this committee about notification when folks who commit high profile, high violent crimes are released so that our police departments and other folks know, making sure that we're working with our federal partners to hold these people accountable and that they're not released before they are supposed to be, while addition to investing in the communities at the same time. Nothing is going to be an end all be all. We're seeing this around the country. And I think for me, this is just one tool. And no one should be able to bypass background checks and just get a gun off the internet, children especially, without having to go through the stringency of what we have to go through to buy medicine at Target.
Delegate McComas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other question, and that's why I kind of wished that Chief Harrison or Commissioner Harrison was here, but maybe you guys can answer this question. All right. Basically, serial numbers can be filed off of guns, and they're done all the time with regular guns. Even if we serialize the ghost guns, they could be filed off. So this is not a panacea. It's not, in other words, I guess what I'm saying is it's what you want to do is not necessarily going to work, because criminals always know how to do the workaround, and the workaround is to shave off the serial numbers. Is that fair?
I'll just say, yes, Delegate, I'll just say you're right. They're always going to do that. But there's also, as you heard of us about NIBUS and ballistics and ways for us to go after it in different ways. This is about us putting every single option on the table to hold these criminals responsible. We're always, the same way that criminals get smarter, our law enforcement are very smart, very intelligent. We do things today that we didn't do 3 or 4 years ago because we had to adjust and continue to adjust to the criminal element and what they're doing. We will continue to do that.
Well, I just will say that the homicides, I think you said that after the bill passed, the omnibus bill in 2014, we had less murders. Is that what you said, Mayor Scott?
Yes, ma'am. That one year. Yes, ma'am.
That 1 year, it dropped from 388 to 363, and then in 15 it jumped up to 539. That was a very, and it's been going up ever since. So, all right, thank you, gentlemen.
Delegate Eric Han.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I have just 2 quick questions. One for the county executive of Montgomery County.
Can we make sure that the county executive, County Executive Elrich, who has not been on the screen for a little while, County Executive, are you here? Yes, he is muted right now. Delegate, if you would ask, do you have a second question not directed to County Executive Elrich, and we will track him down?
Yeah, I do. I can start with Mr. Frosch's question.
That's fine.
I was just listening to the back and forth between you and Delegate McComas about sort of what does it look like for success. So what I gathered from it was that after we passed the 2012 policy, our metric for success as a state was not murders going down. It was just not murders quadrupling, perhaps, because they've doubled, more than doubled. So could you tell us what is your metric for success that we can look to over the next 5 and 10 years to say that this bill has actually had an impact that we can demonstrate to the citizens of our state?
Well, I'm not a social scientist. I'm just a lawyer. The Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and their folks in their gun safety program there, and especially Dr. Daniel Webster, can tell you how to measure this stuff. And they will tell you that the Firearms Safety Act of 2013 has saved lives in our state, that without it, we'd be much worse off. The same will be true of this. Do I understand what tests need to be run? Maryland grows in population. The number of guns in the nation and in our state continues to grow. And so I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that gun injuries, gun deaths, gun crimes are going to keep increasing as more and more people get them. So if we can do better at solving crimes, if we can do better at keeping guns out of the hands of criminals, if we can do better at keeping guns out of the hands of children, I believe we'll save lives. And that's what this bill is designed to do. And as I said, I'm not a social scientist, but I feel very comfortable in predicting that the bill will meet all of those objectives.
So we don't actually have a plan in place. We have not run the numbers to make sure.
It's on, but it's not showing.
The numbers have been run on the Firearms Safety Act of 2013.
Correct. So they, in your opinion, they came out favorably, even though they've more than doubled.
Yeah, I wouldn't call more than doubling favorable, but I would call saving lives favorable. And that's what the bill has done. And Hopkins School of Public Health can show you how that worked.
Yeah, I'm not sure that is going to suffice for the people of Maryland, but thank you for answering that question. Do we have the county executive?
I believe
back?
the county executive is endeavoring to be here, and I can see his or something is on at here. County Executive Elrich, please. I believe it's clear that he stepped away. I will say in the meantime, the commissioner, the police commissioner, did have to step away for another matter, and that's why he had to step away from the panel. But I'll call again for County Executive Elrich, please.
Yes, Mike, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank goodness. You can't, I'm sorry, I'm having a moment of technical difficulties here. Could you repeat the question again?
Delegate Erican hasn't asked it yet, so
okay.
we'll give her the chance to ask the question, then you'll be fine.
Okay.
All right, Delegate Erican.
Thank you. So you had mentioned in your testimony that gun-related deaths are the biggest public health crisis. And I was just wondering if you could tell me if you know what the actual death rates have been from gun crimes in Montgomery County in the last 2 years.
I don't have the numbers with me, but I can tell you that everybody's alarmed because they're far higher than they've been in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
We exceeded in a few months what we used to produce in a year. And it's really concerning. And most of them are crimes between people who know each other.
Right.
So resolution of beef's problem. And that's where these guns, they're far too accessible for stuff like that.
Yeah. I think I read an article that you've had about 16 so far this year, which is, of course, a tragedy. Are you aware of the COVID death rates, though? And would you not think that the actual biggest public health crisis we're facing, not only the state, the county, but a nation, would probably be COVID?
So COVID's an illness, and it's the reason, this is a tragedy. The deaths are tragedies related to illness. And it's why, frankly, I do think it's somewhat controllable, which is why we've tried to limit the things we know that people do to spread it. But killing people is a voluntary action. You go out and you buy a gun, you come back and kill somebody. This is something that is totally based on one person's decision to take somebody else's life. To me, this is alarming at the rate we're getting it. I mean, we'd all go crazy if we were dealing with COVID rates of deaths from guns.
Certainly, I would agree with that. Your county's lost over 1,900 lives to COVID. I would say from a public health crisis perspective, that's probably the higher thing on the list than gun crimes. But thank you again for answering my questions.
Thank you very much. Delegate Shetty, please.
First, I want to start out by thanking Delegate Lopez for her longstanding leadership on this issue. I know that she has worked so hard for so many years and has educated all of us on this issue well before it became one of the more trending news subjects. So I'm grateful for that. And also want to take a moment to thank Attorney General Brian Frosch for joining Delegate Lopez on this. It is incredibly important. So I will start by asking, I know well, actually, before I go to Mr. Mayor, I want to first ask Delegate Lopez a quick question. We've heard reference to Second Amendment a lot in the debate and discussions that have happened earlier in this hearing. It's been a little while since law school for me, so I just don't recall this super clearly, but is there a Second Amendment right to own an untraceable firearm? Delegate Lopez?
Thank you, Delegate Shetty. I have never been to law school, but I do know what the Second Amendment says, and there's nothing in there that guarantees unfettered rights to firearms without regulation. The what and the who of firearm ownership is often regulated. So no, there's nothing that guarantees you a right to an unserialized firearm, but you do have the right to own a firearm, and we've protected that right by giving people an option to have it serialized or other options of how to get rid of that firearm once this bill is enacted.
Okay, got it. And then on that note, I know there's often reference when we have these discussions around gun ownership to law-abiding citizens. And I just want to clarify something. Once a law is enacted, if somebody violates that, is that individual still a law-abiding citizen or no longer?
I think you have to abide by the laws to be considered law-abiding.
Got it. Thank you. So moving on to Mayor Scott really quick. So first, thank you so much for all of the efforts that the city has been doing under your leadership to really address this really alarming rise in cases that we've seen across the state. Every case that comes out, every news story is devastating in and of itself. So really appreciate the important work that you all are doing there to address these crimes. I know we've had a lot of discussions earlier today around trafficking, and I'm just wondering if you wanted to expand around what the city is doing to address this.
No, thank you, Delegate, and thank you for the question. And we know that gun trafficking for us is a serious issue. You heard the Attorney General, you heard other folks talk about the changing the laws and that changing what's happening. Just so you guys have this statistics, and we'll have the final data from 2021 shortly. In 2020, 60% of the weapons that the BPD seized came from out of state, and 84% of them came from outside of the city, to include other counties in Maryland. But the overwhelming majority come from out of state. To start to really deal with that issue in a deeper way, because they hadn't been dealing with gun trafficking, we actually stood up a firearms intelligence unit that works directly with our federal partners, that goes and also partner with Everytown for Gun Safety to develop a one-of-its-kind portal that allows our detectives to see exactly who's trafficking guns, where they're coming from, whether this person who lives in Hampton, Virginia, who claims he bought 10 guns legally and all 10 of them end up on the streets of Baltimore, is to be, can we make a case on those kind of individuals? Is how we brought that case that you heard the Attorney General, myself, and the police commissioner focus on. We're going to continue to deepen that partnership in the coming weeks with our federal partners, in addition to hopefully being able to work on this issue as well, because we hear that from our federal partners at the ATF as well about how important dealing with ghost guns are. Thank you.
All right. I think we are finished with this first panel an hour later. And so we're going to move on, but we thank the Attorney General, the County Executive, the Mayor, for being here today to speak with us. And we will now move to our second panel in favor of the legislation, which is over here. These three people are Ana Martinez, Stephen Abrams, Grace Simonson. I'm going to just hear from these three people on the next panel. And if I could have Ana Martinez. Ms. Martinez, they're coming in. Ana Martinez. She's connecting with connecting her audio, so just one more moment.
Hi, how are you?
All right, Ana Martinez.
Yes.
And you'll have 2 minutes to testify, okay?
Okay, thank
Great.
you.
You can go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Ana Martinez, and I'm surviving mom of Axel Steven Trejos, who lost his life last year on August 18 in a recreation building. My son born here in the United States in Silver Spring, Maryland. On September 28, 2000, he graduated from high school. And he was a really beautiful soul. That's how my other kids describe him. He was a gentleman. He had a really, he was responsible, humble, with a big heart, with a big smile. He was able to touch everybody around him. He never drink or smoke. He never have a criminal record. He never do nothing. He put his position where he was today. It was a terrible tragedy for our family. My son have a lot of dreams and goals for his life. One of the first one was graduated for high school. The next one was to start a job, buy his own car. And he did all that until August 18, when a 14-year-old boy opened a shooting in the recreation center. When my son, he never think about himself. He was thinking about protect my other kid, my other two kids. Where other three boys, John boy was injured that day. I never expecting I'm gonna lose my son this way. But he's never do or enroll with like gun activities or with the wrong people. He always have the right mindset according to what I put on him. And when people ask me how this changed my life, I think I don't have no better word to describe it. Like my son Christopher, my youngest one, said, "Mom, at my age of 11-year-old, my life was destroyed because my older son gone. He was like a father figure and a big brother figure for my other three boys. And this destroy our life completely. Physical, emotional. We have a lot of dreams. They take the opportunity. I mean, this little boy who was 14-year-old, who I don't know from where he get this gun and what he have in mind that day, without nobody do anything to him, nobody touch him, nobody do nothing so he can react. He just was there with a gun and see and start shooting without no reason. And
Ms. Martinez, I hate to do this, but I'm going to ask you if you can begin to summarize what you were going to say. I know this is a terrible tragedy for you, but if you would begin to do that, I would appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I know it's a lot of emotion. I'm sorry. So this is impact our life. they took my son away. I want, and I'm agree with everything like Ms. Lopez said, they need to change and the state attorney, because we need to stop this. Because we've been seeing the news, a lot of young people is the one being used to those type of guns. And I don't want this continue. I don't want no other mother has to cry their babies. I don't want no other mother lost his son. And I feel I don't want anybody go through this situation. And just like when my son lost his life, so I want everything changed and the law change. And those people who commit those crimes can be several. Like I'm sorry, all these emotionals.
Ms. Martinez, we really do appreciate you being here today, and I think we hear you, and we really appreciate what you have to say. But I need to move to the next person. There may be questions that people ask you here in a moment, and so they may give you a chance and to speak a little bit more here in a moment, but I'm going to move on to the next witness. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Thank you very much. Stephen Abrams, please.
Good afternoon, distinguished members of the House Judiciary Committee. My name is Stephen Abrams, and I'm a freshman attending George Mason University in Virginia. I'm here representing Brady and their youth arm, Team Enough, speaking in favor of HB 425. This issue is important to me because when I was 17 years old, I was able to go online and buy the unregulated parts needed to assemble a ghost gun. In fact, an unserialized Glock-like handgun. I did this because I wanted to show how accessible and unregulated these parts and kits are. You can find a video of how easy it was for me to make the purchase on any of Brady's social media platforms. My purchase of these parts was completely legal because of the unregulated availability of these parts and how it circumvents almost all state and federal laws, including age restrictions. There was no background check, there was no age check. I could have bought enough parts for 10 guns, no questions asked. I did not assemble a gun from the parts I purchased, but I could have. It is not complicated or difficult, as the other side may claim. My generation especially knows that the internet has a wealth of information and anyone can do a very simple search on how to assemble these with basic tools and simple instructions. My story shows the accessibility of these weapons to anyone. And when I say it was as easy as buying anything else online, it really was. This means it's just as easy for other minors as well as those who can't otherwise legally obtain a gun or those who wish to traffic firearms. I made this purchase to raise awareness after I saw others my age making videos on how anyone can purchase these parts online. Maryland, along with the rest of the country, has been impacted by ghost guns, and now is the time to take action. I applaud Delegate Lopez, Speaker Jones, and Attorney General Frosch for bringing this bill forward and leading on this policy. I urge you to vote in favor of HB 425.
All right. We'll go to Grace Simonson, please. Grace Simonson.
Good afternoon. My name is Grace Simonson, and I'm a senior at Colonel Zadok Magruder High School in Durwood, Maryland. On Friday, January 21st, a student brought an unserialized ghost gun into my school and shot another student in the lower abdomen area. The gun was able to be purchased online without any sort of background check, regulation, or tracking, and ended up hurting a fellow student. These ghost guns are available to anyone with a credit card and an address. And let's really think about that. I'm 17 years old and have had a debit card that functions as a MasterCard since I was in middle school. All it takes is having a parent be a cosigner on your bank account. Alternatively, there are prepaid credit cards available to purchase at local grocery stores that could serve the same purpose. This easy access to potentially deadly weapons endangers us all. At my high school, the intended victim was one person, but I was in a classroom 2 doors down. I spent 6 hours in a lockdown imagining the what ifs. What if the shooter had decided to fire in the hallway in the passing period? I was in that hallway, my friends were in that hallway, and my younger brother was in that hallway. On top of all of the concerns I have about access, any type of firearm is a potentially dangerous weapon, but an untrackable, untraceable ghost gun has the potential to allow criminals to bypass Maryland's strong gun laws, or, as it happened at my high school, allow a teenager to go into their school and settle a grievance with a deadly weapon. As new problems arise in our constantly changing society, we need to keep up with the times in order to keep civilians and children safe. HB 425 is a bill that is keeping up with the changing technology of this day and age and is the first step in reducing the threat that ghost guns pose to our society and our schools. This bill acknowledges and addresses the rising threat that ghost guns pose and is a critical step in reducing the gun violence the students of this nation are exposed to in their classrooms. This bill addresses the current gaps in federal law that have allowed these build-it-yourself guns to enter our society. Personally, I do not think this bill goes far enough, but I do think it is a start and is hopefully another barrier that will prevent underage children from entering schools and hurting other students. I would strongly urge you to vote in favor of this bill.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for this panel? Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, I wanted to say thank you to this panel in particular, to the young folks, because I know this is your first time testifying in our General Assembly, and we can be a tough crowd. So thank you for your willingness to step up and share your vulnerable story. And also thank you to Ana Martinez, who I know, when we spoke on the phone, I just broke down crying with you too, because it's really quite horrible. And I know that you're speaking to us, again, for your first time with the General Assembly, but you're also speaking to a language that's not your first language. And that takes a lot of bravery. So thank you for being here. And isn't that so?
All right. Are there further questions for this panel? Seeing none, and again, thank you very much for sharing your stories. Thank you very much, Ms. Martinez, for being with us here today. We do appreciate hearing from you, but that will conclude this witness panel. We thank you all again very, very much for being here. We'll go to our next panel. Sam Levy, David Puccino, Karen Herron, please. We're looking for Sam Levy. Sam Levy for 2 minutes, please. I see Mr. Levy. The next three witnesses are in. We'll hear from them, and then we will go to the next panel. All right. Sam Levy for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you all so much for having me here today, Delegate Lopez. It's an honor to be here. Senior counsel at Every Town for Gun Safety, on behalf of our Moms Demand Action volunteers, to lend our voice in support of those incredible survivors you just heard from, and urge a favorable report on House Bill 425. This law is simple, it's clear, and it's comprehensive. This law will finally empower state and local law enforcement officials in Maryland to stem the tide of untraceable, unserialized guns that are flooding the streets of Maryland and killing and injuring far too many Marylanders, most recently that 15-year-old boy. It's high time that this body takes action to stop convicted felons, violent abusers, armed extremists, children, and traffickers from obtaining deadly, untraceable weapons that they cannot legally purchase or possess. ATF, as you heard, is in the process of finalizing changes to the federal rules that will close these gaps at the federal level and go a long way to solving the supply side of this problem. And this law wisely is designed to track those rule changes and ensure that Maryland has the tools it needs to continue to fight at the state level. To talk briefly on the technical details, what this bill does is effectively what the new ATF rule will do, which is make clear that frames and receivers, whether they are finished or unfinished, are firearms. Maryland law already defines the frame or receiver of a firearm as a firearm under the criminal code. You can't possess a frame or receiver any more than you can possess a fully built firearm if you're a prohibited person. Federal law, however, has created a gap that says if you have one of these 80% or unfinished frames or receivers, they are somehow magically not firearms under federal law. And that has allowed this industry to flourish, an online industry that sells with no consequence, with no background checks, with no serial numbers, with no records. And that is a boon for gun traffickers, for prohibited persons, and for a whole host of people that you all have passed strong laws to ensure don't get access to firearms. 9 states and DC have passed laws to combat ghost guns in this way and using the same approach, which is regulating the unfinished parts and the kits that are used to build these untraceable deadly weapons including your neighbors in Delaware and New Jersey and DC, Rhode Island, and most recently in New York, where the law will be finalized shortly. And with only one exception, all of these laws have been upheld as constitutional when challenged in court. And there's one exception that I want to talk briefly about here at Delegate Lopez's request.
Mr. Levy, unfortunately, that's the end of your 2 minutes. I suspect that Delegate Lopez will have a very specific question here in a moment. So I need to keep moving. I'm sorry. David Pusino, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of HB 425 today. My name is David Pusino, and I'm the Deputy Chief Counsel with Giffords Law Center, which is the legal arm of the gun violence prevention organization founded by former Congresswoman and gun violence survivor Gabby Giffords. Ghost guns pose an urgent threat to public safety, and this bill is critically important in addressing the problem. I'd like to, with my testimony today, highlight the way it will work in conjunction with work the federal government is doing in this space, and the reasons why this is necessary, whatever the federal government does. So as Sam mentioned in his testimony, the problem of ghost guns results from the loophole in federal law. And ATF has proposed a new rule to change the definition of firearm that would acknowledge that ghost gun parts are firearms, it would regulate them as firearms, and would therefore close this loophole. That proposed rule was introduced in May of last year. ATF collected comments and feedback from the public, and that process closed in August. So we're now waiting for a final rule and have been waiting for a number of months. And it seems like we're going to be waiting for a number of months more. Recently, the acting director said they wouldn't be finalizing this until June, and then wouldn't be going into effect for months after that. So this loophole is going to stay open, and we need to act now because the longer it's open, the more ghost guns are going to be flooding the streets. If and when the federal rule does go into effect, it will close that loophole for the sale of gun parts. And it also require that gun dealers have their ghost guns that they have in stock serialized, but it doesn't affect members of the public. So there's a huge stock of ghost guns that are currently in private hands that aren't going to be affected by the federal law. This bill will address that problem by requiring that those existing stock of firearms get serialized, and will use a process that is exactly parallel to the federal process for dealers. So it'll be seamless, really well integrated, and won't be additionally burdensome for dealers. It's something they already have to do. In fact, a number of dealers already provide this service. And so it'll be a seamless way for the public to get those firearms serialized. So thank you again, and I'd urge a favorable report on the bill.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Karen Herron, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Clippinger, Vice Chair Moon, and distinguished members of the committee. I am Karen Herron, Legislative Director for Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence. MPGV urges a favorable report on HB 425 to ban ghost guns in the state of Maryland. As others on this panel have and are testifying, the numbers of ghost guns turning up in crimes and investigations around the state have skyrocketed. I would like to highlight one of the most concerning elements of the ghost gun problem, that these guns are too easily accessible to those who are too young to otherwise acquire a gun. Together with poor storage of firearms, way too many guns are making their way into the hands of young people. You just heard the heartbreaking story of the shooting in August of 21 of 14-year-old Maryland boy armed with a ghost gun outside the rec center. In September of 21, a Chesapeake High School student in Essex was apprehended for bringing a 9mm ghost gun to school. And in January, a 17-year-old shot and seriously injured a 15-year-old student at Magruder High School in Montgomery County. The shooter managed to hide in plain sight with the disassembled gun in his backpack for hours until SWAT tracked him down. Subsequent investigations determined that the teen purchased components online that were delivered right to his home. Mental and behavioral health experts are highlighting the alarming state of youth mental health and begging for officials to take more action to provide resources to help youth and take steps to reduce youth access to guns. It makes no sense for us to have a system of laws designed to make sure that guns are kept out of the hands of people who are either too young or otherwise prohibited from owning them, only to allow this easy workaround. MPGV urges a favorable report on HB 425.
Questions to the panel. Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for Sam, and I had asked him to talk about the Nevada law, but since that hasn't come up yet in any discussion, maybe you could just very briefly explain why this bill meets constitutional muster as opposed to why the Nevada bill is still being, or law is being evaluated.
Sure, Delegate, happy to. at issue in the Nevada case is a question of vagueness, right, and how they define the term unfinished frame and receiver and what that means. And I think the bill that the delegate and the Attorney General's office have crafted very wisely avoids the Nevada language and uses the language that will in fact be put to use at the federal level. So to be clear for the members of the committee, when that rule is finalized, unfinished frames and receivers, the kind that are used in these build kits and used for trafficking and it can now legally be obtained without a background check, will be firearms under federal law. It will be the same thing as buying a completed gun or buying a finished frame or receiver. It's going to be illegal federally to sell them as an FFL unless they're serialized and marked. It'll be illegal to sell them without a background check. So that's going to be the state of the world. And what this bill does wisely is create a state law that tracks that, right? The definition, the test in this bill, the question of whether these parts can be readily converted into a functioning frame or receiver is the same test that's going to be applied at the federal level. And I won't speak for the delegate, but I believe it was her intent that the expansive explanation and the factors that go into whether something can be readily converted is designed to track what's going to be the federal law going forward, so it's consistent and evenly applied across the state and across the country.
Thank you, Sam. And with the indulgence of the chair, can I ask a question to Ms. Herron?
Yes.
Ms. Herron, I know that you, with Marylanders for Gun Violence Prevention, have been working on collecting data for the rural areas as well, because we've heard from Montgomery County, we're going to hear from Prince George's County, we've heard from Baltimore City. I think it would be good for the committee to hear that this simply isn't just an urban area issue or an issue for areas with high population density.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, we're hearing a lot about what it looks like in Baltimore City and in more metropolitan areas, but it doesn't take much of a Google search to find that there are plenty of these cases that are popping up all over the state. I found cases, one from Harford County in 2019, where a loaded ghost gun was found in the possession of an underage man, sorry. Another one in Allegheny County just in October of 2021. These cases are often combined with drug charges, but not always. 2 individuals were arrested in Frederick County recently, one of which was 20 years old in possession of a ghost gun, another one in Charles County. And then very recently, I think the news article I found was from January 31st, Cecil County, using a grant from the Governor Hogan's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, had a task force that seized $200,000 in drugs along with 76 illegal firearms, 35% of which were ghost guns. So it is popping up pretty much everywhere.
Thank you.
Are there questions for this panel? Seeing none, we'll move to the next panel. Thank you all very much for being here today. We'll hear next from Police Chief Aziz from Prince George's County, the State's Attorney for Prince George's County, Aisha Braveboy, State's Attorney McCarthy from Montgomery County, Perry Paler from the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. If we have Chief Aziz will go first. Just as a note, I know that there is an order I've been given. I'm going to pull one person out of order, and I believe the state's attorney I'm not sure if I saw that right. The state's attorney for Caroline County, I believe, is testifying in favor. And if that's the case, I'm going to move him to the next panel. All right, Chief Aziz, are you here? We only have Perry Paler from the State's Attorney's Office of Prince George's County. All right, well, we're going to hear from Perry Paler then for 2 minutes, and then we will see who we can get a hold of next. So Mr. Paler, for 2 minutes, please.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Clippinger. Thank you to the committee. Good afternoon. My name is Perry Paler. I'm the Deputy State's Attorney for Prince George's County. I also serve as Chief of the Guns and Drugs Unit. I'm here today to testify in support of House Bill 425. The Prince George's County Police Department noted a steady increase in the proliferation of ghost guns in the county over the last 2 years. Because the receivers are not serialized, these guns, as currently configured, cannot be traced. This facilitates these guns falling into possession of persons who are prohibited and cannot legally possess a handgun. Passage of this bill would create a legal requirement that persons selling an unfinished receiver in Maryland have the same serialization as if they were selling a finished receiver. The passage of this bill will greatly assist law enforcement in preventing prohibited persons from illegally purchasing and possessing handguns. The State's Attorney's Office for Prince George's County strongly supports this bill and recommends a favorable report for HB 425. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask Robert Hill if he is here to speak on behalf of State's Attorney McCarthy.
Yes, Chairman.
All right, that's fine. Then we'll hear from you for 2 minutes, and we'll see if other people join the call. So
yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for hearing our testimony. Mr. McCarthy very much wanted to be here. He has a conflict that prevented him from coming today. He's planning on testifying on this bill, the cross in the Senate next week. Our office strongly supports HB 425 and urge a favorable report. We want to thank Attorney General Frosch for making ghost guns a top priority of his office, and Delegate Lopez for her hard work for all these years on this issue. This addresses a significant public risk in our communities related to untraceable firearms. And I would just note, we have had an alarming number of ghost guns recovered on school property in Montgomery County. 5 so far this year. 1 was recovered at a recreation center. And so we're very concerned about it being in the hands of young people and a danger to young people. We prosecuted a case in 2019 of a man in Silver Spring who had an operation manufacturing these ghost guns in his basement and was selling them to people who would otherwise not qualify to possess these guns, and criminals. I would just note that the numbers from that year in 2019, and this comes from the Montgomery County Police, the number of ghost guns that recovered that year were 16. In 2020, 56, and in 2021, 70. So an almost 5-fold increase of ghost guns that have been recovered. This bill is very important. It is important. It's an important tool for law enforcement to use serial numbers to trace weapons in solving crimes. And if you got guns out there that don't have the numbers, that's a big problem. And so just to close, I would just urge a favorable report, because this is a critical public safety issue. It's critical to have guns that have serial numbers, and it's critical to keep people who should not have these guns, to keep those guns out of their hands. Thank you.
All right, we're going to hear from Joe Riley. He's coming in right now. He signed up to testify in favor. We're going to hear from him right now, and then we'll take questions for Mr. Paylor, Mr. Hill, and Mr. Joe Riley, who we believe
Thank you,
is
Chair Clippinger. Can you hear me?
Yes, 2 minutes.
My name is Joe Riley. I'm the elected state's attorney for Caroline County and the legislative chair for the Maryland States Attorneys Association. We took a member vote on this bill, the 24 electeds and our 5 associate members, and we are in unanimous support of this House bill. We seek a favorable report, and that's from all of our jurisdictions, large and small, urban and rural. And we thank Delegate Lopez for bringing forward this important bill.
All right, direct and to the point. So we'll now take questions. Delegate Anderson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I know that the police go out and pretty much make arrests, and the state's attorneys are the ones that prosecute them. And in some cases, state's attorneys' offices has special prosecution units that actually go out and try to uncover white-collar crime and things like that. My question with regard to this particular bill is, will state's attorneys' offices across the state, or let's say, for instance, Mr. Paylor and Montgomery County, will you establish a unit within your office to go after the manufacturers of these guns as well? Because I know, I mean, if you find someone with a ghost gun and then you arrest the person in possession of it, yeah, you prosecute him. But how do we find the manufacturers other than the one that I don't know if I won't say you stumbled across, but you did find one in Montgomery County. But the bigger manufacturers, how will that work?
Well, Delegate Anderson, I'm sorry. I'm in Prince George's County.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the gentleman from Montgomery County, and I remembered your name because I think I met you once. But go ahead.
For me in Prince George's County, well, yes, we currently have a guns and drugs unit. So to the extent that we found that manufacturers would be in violation of this new law, we would definitely go after them. Obviously, we will work with our law enforcement partners, FBI, ATF, and coordinate with both the Attorney General's office and the U.S. Attorney's office. But we would definitely be strongly in favor of pursuing manufacturers when appropriate.
And Montgomery County?
Yes, Delegate Anderson, nice to see you. We currently have a major crimes unit. We also have an organized crime unit, and those two units currently are involved in working on these cases. It just depends on whether it's organized crime or if it's a major crime. We currently have that. If we find the need, and I would have to check with the state's attorney on this, if we had the need to create a new unit to deal specifically with this, we certainly would do so. We certainly would do so. And we've always taken the prosecution of firearms cases very seriously.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two brief questions, and I think the first would be best suited for Mr. Riley. If a student brings a gun, as it would be defined under this bill, onto, let's say, a school property or recreational center, is there a law that currently prohibits that?
Well, you can't bring firearms onto a school property, and of course they're underage. They couldn't possess a firearm, assuming they're a student at one of our secondary schools, which would be under 18. Perhaps it would be a juvenile crime. Perhaps it would be up to adult jurisdiction.
So there are several laws that would be in place already. What is it to possession? So if this were passed hypothetically, and this would allow us to prosecute, I guess it would be the possession portion of the bill for one of these students. You could prosecute them for the possession.
If this bill was passed?
Yes. I'm just asking what portion of the bill would apply in that situation.
It would be another crime to be able to charge them with. It wouldn't be standalone. It would be in addition to.
Yeah, but it would be the possession portion of this bill. And one final question, I think this is for each of the state's attorney's office. In a lot of cases like this, if you follow it, Montgomery County was the most recent case where they talked about this issue. There are actually like approximately six charges that young man is facing. If this bill is passed, is it your intention to actually prosecute these charges in the future if these situations occur? And I'll pose that question to each of you.
Well, I don't think Mr. Hill is going to be able to comment on the case that's ongoing, but in the theoretical case, there would be a desire from my office to charge every applicable count that was possible and not limit myself to just one particular count. Any violation of the law, I think, should be charged, and use that as a potential to either work the case out or have a trial and let the chips fall where they may as far as what the defendant would be convicted of beyond a reasonable doubt.
And could you other gentlemen comment on that, please?
Yes, just I think State's Attorney Riley is correct. I cannot comment on an existing case, so I'm gonna have to leave it at that. But
yeah, the current case is not my concern. I'm just going forward. I just want to understand: is it the intention in general, if this law is passed, to prosecute the charges for students of possession in schools and rec centers and so on and so forth?
Well, if a person is found in violation or is arrested for that, and we look at the case and we determine a crime has been committed, if it's a juvenile, the matter would be dealt with in juvenile court. If it's an adult, the matter would be dealt with in adult court.
All right, thank you.
Are there questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond briefly.
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry. He asked for both. That's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, based on the hypothetical you provided, obviously that might invoke Public Safety Article 5-133 for possessing a firearm under 21. And in addition, if we determine based on the facts that the person was in possession of a ghost gun, then that would be a charge under this statute for possession. So a person could most likely be subject to criminal liability for both possession under 21 and possession of a ghost gun.
Are there further questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, we thank you all very much. I think we have maybe two and a half more panels to go, and then we're going to those in opposition. Again, each of the following with 2 minutes: Clinton Wolcott, Andrea Chambly, Leslie Milano, Melissa Ladd, Melanie Shapiro, Mindy Landau. So we're going to look for Clinton Wolcott here. Clinton Wolcott. Clinton Wolcott. They're entering the room now, so we just need a moment for Mr. Wolcott to appear. Clinton Wolcott. Clinton Wolcott needs to connect to audio. He is connected. Clinton Wolcott.
Yes.
Great.
I'm here. I can't see myself, but can you hear me?
Can hear you, and we'll give you, okay, but we're going to need to ask you, Mr. Wolcott, to turn off the YouTube link that you have. Wolcott to appear. Clinton Wolcott.
Yes, I'm here. I thought I had muted my.
Close the YouTube link. Clinton Wolcott needs to connect to audio. He is connected. Clinton Wolcott.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Have you gotten rid of that echo?
The echo is actually on your end.
No, my echo. Yes.
YouTube.
I think I got it.
You got it? All right, great. We'll hear from
sorry.
Mr. Wolcott for 2 minutes. Committee, I am going to step away briefly, and the vice chair is going to step into the chair just for a couple minutes, but we'll go with Mr. Wolcott for 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Clippinger, and Deputy Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Clint Wolcott, speaking on behalf of the Critical Issues Forum, Advocacy for Social Justice. CIF is a coalition of 3 synagogues in Montgomery County. We speak out on policy issues that relate to our shared values, including the Jewish traditions that emphasize the sanctity and primary value of human life. We provide this testimony in support of HB 425 relating to untraceable firearms, ghost guns. As you've heard, ghost guns are firearms without serial numbers made from kits sold over the internet, available to criminals, teenagers, and others not permitted to buy firearms. As residents of Montgomery County, we've seen what can happen when teenagers get ghost guns. Last month, a 17-year-old shot another student in a bathroom at Magruder High School in Durwood, not far from where I live. He used a gun he assembled from a kit purchased online. This is not an isolated example. As the county government has reported here, this was the 5th ghost gun recovered in a county school during this school year. The number of ghost guns confiscated by the local police has mushroomed in recent years. A 5-fold increase in our county, a 10-fold increase in Prince George's County, and an increase from 12 to 264 over 3 years in Baltimore. Because these guns are bought over the internet, no questions asked, they are simple for children to acquire. Luckily, this is a problem that can be solved. HB 425 adopts a requirement that all guns sold in the state be engraved with a serial number. Further, the bill provides a mechanism for individuals to have a serial number engraved on ghost guns made prior to the effective date of the law. In sum, HB 425 provides a carefully designed structure to eliminate this fast-growing source of uncontrolled lethal weapons. Ghost guns put all of us, and especially our children, at great risk of shootings, unintentional harm, and suicide. They must be stopped. We request that the committee favorably refer the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Andrea Chambly.
Hello, my name is Andrea Chambly. Thank you so much for having me. I'd rather not provide my town because I've been targeted by dangerous and irresponsible gun owners. I've learned the hard way that I am on my local police's rapid response list. And when my home was broken into, they were there in about 30 seconds. I will say that I live in District 9A, in the district that Delegate Kettleman and Novotny represent. And as you may imagine, I am active in my district. I'm a volunteer with Moms Demand Action. I'm also a survivor of gun violence. I have a gun in my household. My family includes gun owners and veterans who take gun ownership seriously and responsibly. I support HB 425 because I know firsthand the cost of violence. I know it upends your entire life. You've heard one speaker demonstrate how it rearranges the very constitution of our bodies, our hearts, and our minds. You've heard lots of testimony about how gun violence affects your neighbors, friends, and the constituents you swear to represent, and about how this bill is common sense gun safety. But for many of you, how it affects us doesn't seem to be making a difference. This bill has been introduced and reintroduced for years. In the interest of time, I won't repeat the statistics you've heard today. I have read Johns Hopkins that studies it, says they've been able to trace less than 1% of the ghost guns they've recovered, with significant increases in the recovery of these ghost guns every year. The epidemic is here. All this does for legitimate hobbyists is to require them to get a serial number. It affects no other legal activity. Gun violence survivors are growing by the hundreds in the United States every day. The more of us there are, the more allies of us there'll be. If you're not with us, you're against us. Please don't fail us this year. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Leslie Milano.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Milano, and I'm the president of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club with a membership of hundreds of Marylanders. WDC urges the passage of HB 425. As the Giffords organization states, if you can build IKEA furniture, you can build a ghost gun. In 2016, Prince George's County Police encountered just one ghost gun. Last year, they encountered 264 ghost guns. In Montgomery County, the numbers have increased fivefold in 2 years. Now ghost guns are being purchased by children in easy to assemble kits, as we saw last month when a Montgomery County student shot another student with a ghost gun at a Montgomery County school. Ghost guns favor criminals. An untraceable weapon makes investigating crimes far more difficult for law enforcement. Unsolved murders using ghost guns results in emboldened criminals. We need to make life easier for law enforcement and more difficult for criminals, not the other way around. The gun lobby has a monetary interest in increasing gun ownership and eliminating gun laws. They've misinterpreted the Second Amendment to mean all guns for all people at all times, arguing frequently in support of people's hobbies. We need to ban ghost guns for the safety of the many and not prioritize the hobby of a few. This legislation will save lives. This can't be said of all legislation. It can be said of HB 425. We ask for your support for HB 425 and strongly urge a favorable committee report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Melissa Ladd.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Melissa Ladd. I live in Olney in District 19 in Delegate Crutchfield's district. I am a volunteer with the Maryland chapter of Moms Demand Action. I'm also a substitute teacher in Montgomery County Public Schools and the mom of 2 high school students. I'm here today to speak in support of HB 425 because 5 ghost guns have been recovered in MCPS schools this school year alone. The 21-22 school year has seen the highest rate of gunfire on school grounds in American history. Ghost guns are available to children as evidenced by the January 21st shooting at Magruder High School, just down the road from my home. These firearms are easily accessible to anyone with a credit card and allow prohibited purchasers to avoid a background check and obtain a gun. HB 425 would close this loophole and help to keep ghost guns out of the hands of children and those not allowed to own firearms. 10 states and Washington, D.C. have already enacted legislation to regulate ghost guns. Let's make Maryland the next. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I believe Melanie Shapiro is not here, so we will go next to Mindy Landau.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the committee for having me today. My name is Mindy Landau, and I'm the co-lead for the Brady, Maryland State Executive Committee. I'm also the co-lead and founder of the Montgomery County chapter of Brady United Against Gun Violence. I'm a longtime resident of Montgomery County, and I'm a retired federal 40-year civil servant. As you have heard many times today, ghost guns look, feel, and function like a traditional gun and are just as deadly and dangerous. Ghost guns undermine almost all gun laws. The parts and kits used to build ghost guns are untraceable and unregulated and are available to purchase online or at gun shows without any background check. These parts and kits can be bought by people who should not own guns, domestic abusers, gun traffickers, and even underage children. In fact, they are intentionally marketed as unregulated and untraceable to appeal to people who want to avoid background checks. This means anyone who has already been deemed unfit to possess a firearm could easily manufacture one, putting our communities at risk. Gun violence is clearly an epidemic in our country and in our state. In Montgomery County alone, as you've heard, the proliferation of ghost guns has increased 5-fold over the last few years. These numbers will only continue to rise as these guns become more well-known and accessible. They're already in our own backyard, and their continued easy availability is detrimental to all communities across our state, from my home in the suburbs to Baltimore to the most rural reaches of Maryland. The bottom line is with rights come responsibilities. Hobbyists can continue to purchase serialized components, but we all know the importance of ensuring that firearms used in crimes can be traced. Many other states, such as New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Nevada, and Washington, D.C., have all taken action to regulate or ban ghost guns, and several other states are considering similar legislation. Gun violence is a complex epidemic requiring a wide variety of solutions, and this legislation is one critical piece of that solution. We commend Delegate Lopez for taking this action to introduce this legislation, and it is past time for Maryland to do the right thing and ban untraceable, unregulated guns. Brady United strongly supports HB 425. Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we've now got Melanie Shapiro, who will go next.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I apologize. I was in JPR testifying. I am with Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, and we are here to testify in support of House Bill 425. I did not have the benefit of hearing all of the prior witnesses testify. I am sure that they discussed all of the concerns with ghost guns. I'm going to discuss why the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence is concerned with them, and that's because higher rates of firearm ownership correlate to a higher rate of domestic violence homicide. There's a 65% higher incidence rate of domestic violence firearm homicide in states with the highest firearm ownership compared to states with lower ownership rates. And since women are the most common victims of domestic violence homicide, they are most at risk with increased gun ownership. The risk of homicide for women increases by 500% with the presence of a gun in the home. In 2020, in Maryland, there were 41 victims of domestic violence homicide, and 75% of those were caused by guns. And according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 1 in 9 background check denials are connected to domestic abuse. Maryland has existing laws to prevent prohibited persons from obtaining firearms. We need to ensure that ghost guns have the serialization and the individuals acquiring them need to go through the proper background checks. So for all of those reasons, we are urging a favorable report on House Bill 425.
All right, are there any questions for this panel? All right, thank you. Seeing none, we will move to the last panel of straight favorable witnesses, I believe. And we'll call them up: Kara Dudley, Joe Ziegelbauer, Nicole Hollywood, Lisa Lohman, and Giselle March. And do we have Kara Dudley? So you can begin when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Kara Dudley. I live in Chesapeake Beach, Maryland, in District 27C, which is in Delegate Fisher's district. I am the Southern Maryland local group lead for Moms Demand Action, Maryland. That includes Charles County, St. Mary's County, and Calvert County. I'm a mother of two and a military spouse. I support HB 425 because ghost guns are available to anyone with a credit card, including children, and we need to do all that we can to ensure that we are keeping our communities safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Joe Ziegelbauer.
Hello, my name is Joe Ziegelbauer. I live in Kensington in District 18 and Delegate Shetty's district. I'm a volunteer with the Montgomery County local group of the Maryland chapter of Moms Demand Action. I grew up in the Midwest and completed a hunter safety course conducted by the state's Department of Natural Resources. I've owned multiple guns and used to skeet shoot and hunt with my dad and brother. I want to dispel any myths that our group is opposed to all guns everywhere. We are a broad community that is passionate about ending gun violence. We support responsible gun ownership, but we obviously do not want teens buying ghost guns off of the internet without any background check. Last year, as you heard earlier, a 14-year-old from Silver Spring shot and killed Axel Trejos in Germantown with a ghost gun. For my family, this was not just a horrible headline to read. My daughter had 2 classes with the shooter in middle school, and both of my kids knew the shooter. Multiple lives of Marylanders were forever changed that day because of the easy access to a ghost gun. These tragedies are happening in our community right now, and we need solutions to prevent future violence. I support HB 425 because ghost guns are available to anyone with a credit card, including teens, and we need to do more to keep our community safe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Nicole Hollywood.
Thank you. My name is Nicole Hollywood. I live in Salisbury, Maryland, in District 37B. I am a volunteer with the Maryland chapter of Moms Demand Action. I'm also a gun owner, a survivor of gun violence, a mother, and an educator. I support HB 425 because ghost guns are available to anyone with a credit card, including prohibited purchasers like domestic abusers. And we need to do all that we can to ensure that we are keeping our community safe. I understand firsthand that domestic abusers far too often use firearms to coerce and terrorize their victims. I have used the court to obtain a protective order for myself and my children, and I appreciate that Maryland law makes it illegal for someone to have a firearm if there is a valid civil protective order issued. But with the prevalence and ease of access of ghost guns, domestic abusers are able to circumvent state law and easily obtain a firearm with no background check to prevent their purchase. Thank you for your time, and I ask you for a favorable report out of committee.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Lisa Lohman.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Lohman. I live in Glen Arm in District 42B, and I'm a volunteer with the Baltimore County chapter of Maryland Moms Demand Action. I support HB 425 for a simple reason. I'm scared. A few years ago, my daughter Julia and her friends were threatened by a high school classmate with a gun. He posted a picture on social media with the gun in his lap. The gun belonged to the student's father, who also had other weapons in his home. I don't know what kind of gun it was. It doesn't matter because my daughter was terrified and so was I. Administrators and teachers at my daughter's school had a hard time handling the threat. The 16-year-old student seemed harmless. We had known him since kindergarten, but we were wrong. He was angry and he had access to his father's guns. This happened before I knew ghost guns even existed. And now vulnerable, sensitive teens can go online and buy kits to put these weapons together with just a credit card. Yesterday, a student was shot at Catonsville High School, right in Baltimore County. My first thought, and what I always think after a school shooting, that could have been my daughter, Julia. I know what it's like to worry that your child won't make it home from a place you thought was safe, from school. Children look to us, the adults in their lives, to take care of them. We call on you, our elected officials here in Maryland, to protect us and our families. Do the right thing. Ban ghost guns now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And last, we have Giselle Morch for this panel.
Hello, you all know my name is Giselle Merck. Thank you, Delegate Moon. And thank you, Delegate Lopez. I am with District 18, where Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, Delegates Jared Solomon, Emily Shetty, and Alcar represent me. I am a mother, a volunteer with Montgomery County, Maryland, chapter of Moms Demand Action, and an Everytown Survivor Fellow. I'm in this because my only son, J.C. Webster, was murdered, was assassinated in 2017, which makes me a concerned citizen. Ghost guns allows criminals to bypass our state's strong laws. Please don't let anyone else join this club of people being injured, murdered, or hurt. Just today, I was contacted by the Victims Witness Coordinator regarding reading names of victims at the Victim Memorial Service that Maryland holds, the whole state of Maryland holds every year. This year, it's on April 24th, which is my daughter's birthday. So we all will be doing that instead of celebrating her birthday. So I close in saying, besides to please support HB 425, please use your power to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this panel? All right, thank you. Seeing none, we have 2 people signed up favorable with amendment. Only one of them is here, however, so we're gonna go ahead and bring in Rich Gibson next. Mr. Gibson, you can go whenever you are ready. Mr. Gibson, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry, Delegate Moon. I apologize. I didn't know that I was able to begin. Forgive me. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Rich Gibson, State's Attorney for Howard County and President of the Maryland State's Attorneys Association. The MSAA is comprised of a geographically, demographically, and politically diverse group, a true reflection of Maryland. Whether male, female, Republican, or Democrat, whether elected by a population that is rural, suburban, or urban, part of the state, we unanimously agree that ghost guns are a problem, and we support this bill becoming law. We've had a rapid proliferation of untraceable, unregulated, and highly lethal weapons flooding our state. We're aware of this threat because we're recovering ghost guns in traffic stops, search warrants, and sadly in cases where they're used in crimes of violence against members of our community. Ghost guns are not linked to any person acquired without a background check. That keeps handguns out of the hands of individuals that we as society know should not have possession of firearms. Gun traffickers, domestic abusers, people who've been already convicted of crimes of violence can easily print parts and assemble from unregulated kicks, handguns, and go back to business as usual without any government oversight or accountability. We need this bill. However, the MSAA strongly urges an amendment removing the clause in section 5703B1 of the bill referencing federal law. Statutory construction requires prosecutors to prove beyond a reasonable doubt every element of the language of a bill or law in order to obtain a conviction. As such, we ask that you remove any reference to federal law and criminalize the possession, transfer, and sale of any unfinished frame or receiver unless it's been imprinted with a serial number from a licensed firearms manufacturer or importer. Again, we urge a favorable report with amendment, and thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Gibson? All right, thank you. I believe that puts us on the unfavorable panel next. And so we're just going to call people in the order in which they are signed up. Do we have William McCann Jr., Sheriff Jeff Gawler, Robert Bowman, Travis Leroll, Trevor Santos, or John Jocelyn? We'll start bringing people in. And William McCann is our first up. If William is here. Oh, no, William's not here. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started with Travis Leroll, who's here, and John Jocelyn next as the people file in. Travis Leroll, if you are ready, you can begin. All right, we may have lost Travis. All right, let's start with John Jocelyn. John Jocelyn can begin.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. John Jocelyn speaking for 2A Maryland. We've heard a lot of focus on the firearm itself. It's interesting that the bill also includes being advertised as being a definition for a firearm. That definitely needs to be addressed. The penalties are very severe for a person without any other underlying crime involved. They are prohibitors. Anybody who does not comply with this bill, absent any other crime, becomes prohibited for life. This is absolutely unfair to the legitimate person. I question whether the dealers were ever contacted on this. I spoke to a dealer of an association here in Maryland. They have no idea what the federal law will do, and this bill is predicated upon federal law, and the gentleman from Howard County was correct. This language should not be in the bill. We didn't look at, is the dealer going to be the manufacturer if he puts a serial number on? Is he protected from any liability lawsuits because he did put a serial number on it? Is he required to run a background check on the person who brings the firearm in? What's most troubling about this is that we focus on the firearm. We haven't said a thing about the perpetrator. If these firearms are such a concern, why do we not criminalize with a felony the use by a prohibited person of one of these firearms? 5 years, no parole for a criminal in possession. Another 5 years if you commit a crime. Another 5 years if you harm someone. Make all of these felonies, make them run as consecutive and not concurrent. Let's focus on the criminal, but this bill doesn't do that. We focused on the object, and history has shown us that focusing on the object is not successful. We urge an unfavorable report on this bill because we know that the misdemeanor will not be prosecuted, and I would point you to Delegate Atar's testimony on straw purchases, where she admitted as a city state's attorney that misdemeanors are not prosecuted. Thank you.
Delegate Moon, who was next on your list?
Great, here. Mark Pennick, Alfred Yu, Thomas Kasuba, Daniel Menendez, and Edward Herson.
All right, we'll go to Alfred Yu then for 2 minutes. Alfred Yu, we're waiting. Well, let me be clear here. That was the second panel. So Mr. Pennack, or I'm sorry, Mr. Jocelyn just finished the second panel then? Is that right?
He was the only one in our first.
Oh,
set of
I see.
people. So we're starting the second panel with Mark Pennack and Alfred Yu.
Okay. Then we'll hear from Mr. Yu for 2 minutes and then we'll go from there. All right, Mr. Yu, go ahead.
Hi, Chairman and members of the committee. Thanks for having me. I'm a cognitive psychologist with the Army Research Lab, but these remarks are my own as a private citizen. Until recently, I lived in Baltimore City. I urge you to rethink this bill because it'll make criminals of currently law-abiding gun owners. In 2019, I took a Army small arms course to better understand the physical and mental burden soldiers face and to shape my own research to help them. That experience helped me fabricate prototype dummy weapons for Army colleagues to evaluate future technologies like smart scopes. COVID had me working from home for 9 months, but a new project needed to examine the impact of recoil on soldier-worn sensors, and I looked into acquiring a real AR-15 to get more experience with shooting dynamics. With COVID looming and gun store shelves empty, I looked into other legal options. So I downloaded design files and 3D printed a self-serialized lower receiver and completed a functional AR-15 using parts I ordered online. Without the right to make one in my own home, I wouldn't have had the time, money, and risk tolerance to accomplish this. I recognize that untraceable guns are used in crimes and truly feel for those who spoke so powerfully for gun violence victims today. But the ability to privately manufacture firearms has allowed me to better serve the people who serve our country in uniform. I'm actually overseas right now because the Army sent me. My firearms are safely stored in Maryland, but if this bill passes, I'll turn into a criminal on January 1st of next year, right along with violent criminals who likely won't know or care about the law. Respectfully, I want to point out that Delegate Lopez, Mayor Scott, and Attorney General Frosch each made inaccurate statements about provisions for hobbyists. This is because the serialization procedure is narrowly written for 80% kits, and it will absolutely prohibit private manufacture of firearms from raw materials after January 1st. In short, the bill needs work, and I don't want to be made a criminal. Please consider amending or withdrawing your support for House Bill 425. Thank you for your time and consideration.
All right. We're going to go to Mark Pennack, then Thomas Kasuba and Dan Menendez. So we'll go to Mark Pennack next for 2 minutes. Mr. Pennack? Mark Pennack? He's in, but not, he has to unmute. Mr. Pennack, you need to unmute yourself.
Unmute.
There we go. If you can turn on your camera, that's great, but otherwise we'll hear you for 2 minutes.
And trying to turn on the camera, Mr. Chairman, and there's successful at last.
All right, great. Go
So
ahead.
I've been testifying for this committee since I was a part of an expert panel in 2013. And this is the only time I've ever written 17 pages of single-space testimony, including not within that total, many pages of attachments. This bill, as that testimony illustrates, will end up invalidated, just like the Nevada bill was invalidated under the Due Process Clause. This bill will be challenged if enacted the same way the DC statute was challenged when it was enacted. And I wanted to commend to you, since I've heard much testimony about how the sponsors and backers are interested in compromise. DC passed, and this is detailed in my written testimony, an amendment to this ghost gun bill that preserves the right of individuals, private individuals, to manufacture their own guns, and a procedure that's very simple to establish a means by which those manufacturers or private individuals could obtain a serial number and report it to the Metropolitan Police Department. That's a compromise that this bill simply does not make possible. The penalties associated with this bill are onerous and egregious. I can't help but wonder what happened from the Ghost Guns bill last year, where they simply attached a civil penalty to the first violation. This bill has no such provision. It criminalizes innocent possession without any requirement of a mens rea requirement in a way that brings it into question. Under the Due Process Clause, the lack of a mens rea is favorable to the bill. I would refer you to the Court of Appeals, and that's the Maryland Court of Appeals decision in Lawrence versus State, which is referenced in the material, and it will basically make this bill dead from the start. So there's so many legal problems associated with this bill. I urge you to rethink it. And there are means in which you can accomplish the serialization that the federal regulations, the ATF regulations that will go into effect in June, will abolish the interstate problem of the bill. No longer under those regulations will there be any possibility of an interstate sale by credit card or otherwise on the internet for these kits. The kits will be abolished.
Thank you.
I urge you to, for unfavorable report as written.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Thomas Kasuba, please.
Hi, my name is Thomas Kashuba from Ellicott City, Maryland. I'm a registered Democrat. You know, had this bill started with a person that commits a crime with a homemade firearm will get 3 years added to their sentence, I would have believed that this was about criminal misuse of firearms instead of being 100% aimed at the workshop craftsman. The only ghost in this bill is the criminal because he is nowhere to be found. So even after 2 years into this pandemic, the state of Maryland has yet to vaccinate our entire population. Yet in half that amount of time, we're supposed to go ahead and serialize all the quote ghost guns that are out there. I don't think this is reasonable, nor do I think it is possible. I will say out loud what is usually the quiet part. There are only 2 reasons why the government should know what you own. 1 is to tax it, and 2 is to take it. This is a privacy issue. No one really should know what I own and what I don't own. That should be a mystery. So what I find very disturbing is that something that my great-grandfather may have produced was okay for him, okay for my grandfather, okay for my father, but now is not okay for me to have. I really wonder what innocuous hobbies that I currently participate in will become contraband and will land my future grandchildren in prison. This is very worrisome. So if a criminal steals a ghost gun that has been serialized, any self-respecting criminal is going to go ahead and erase that file off that serial number. We're back to it being a ghost gun again. We haven't gained anything. I seriously think that you should abandon this because it is not about the criminal. It is about trying to bludgeon the firearm owners of Maryland. We are not your enemies. We are not your political opponents. Thank you.
One more on this panel, and then I see that there are people from the first panel that are going to come in. We'll call them in the next panel. Dan Menendez for 2 minutes. Dan Menendez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I coming through okay?
You are. For 2 minutes, please.
Wonderful. Okay. So, as a resident of Montgomery County and a novice gunsmith, a holder of an HQL, a 3D printing enthusiast, this gun bill does absolutely nothing because it's entirely ineffective in the sense that you've made illegal the sale of kits, but you can buy a $99 3D printer, print it, spend about 3 or 4 weeks testing and actually putting together the weapon, not have to serialize it, and not have to register the parts. What I would instead recommend, and bold to do so, I know, but what I would instead recommend is just required firearm parts that are required for use in a firearm specifically, to be sent to an FFL instead of to the owner or the purchaser, and they pick it up there. In doing so, you don't have the spooks working out of the federal government in working against what many gun owners fear. You have the community policing itself, where the federally licensed dealer can check the age of any firearm part before it's in the hands of an individual. Whereas you just make it illegal, the same 15-year-old is going to buy a $99 3D printer, $20 worth of filament, print it out, file down the parts, get the parts that they need anyways, and shoot anyways because it's illegal, but they're already planning on doing something illegal anyways. So what does it matter? So for that reason, I would have liked to be approved with changes, but those changes would probably be a different bill. So I would like to be put down as unfavorable.
Questions for the panel. Delegate Shoemaker, then Erican.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This for Mr. Pennick. Sir, you mentioned the Court of Appeals decision in Lawrence versus State. Could you be a little more specific as to what the court's decision in that case portends for this particular bill?
Sure, and that decision concerned Maryland's ban on carrying on or about the person a handgun. And it's the citations in my written testimony if you wanted to check with it. The courts held, because the case didn't involve a case about handgun being about the person, but gave an express signal, and that's the word the court uses, that the word about was so vague in the context of 4-203B1 that the court would strike it down in the next appropriate case under the due process clause of the Maryland Constitution and the federal Constitution. That's an express signal they made to the General Assembly that this court almost never does. And this body ignores that signal at its peril. The same problem obtains with this bill because parts of this bill are even more vague than the about language in section 4-203. I refer to you to the readily convertible language in the bill. The bill makes no reference to federal standards whatsoever. It's freestanding. It doesn't even attempt to define what's readily convertible. So, and it also criminalizes possession of my standard block of aluminum. So there's rife with vagueness all throughout, and my detailed testimony goes into that in some detail. So I would urge you to read Lawrence versus State for what's going to happen to this bill. It's the same test that the Nevada court used in striking down the Nevada test, the Ghost Gun bill.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Erican.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. So my question is actually for Mark. Can you tell us a little bit more about the DC law and how it differs from this bill?
Oh, that's a very good question, Delegate. What happened in DC, they had a very similar ban that this bill would enact, and they were sued in federal court under the Second Amendment and for vagueness as well. And in response to that lawsuit, in the case of Heller versus DC, they amended the statute in citations in my written testimony to provide a means by which an existing owner, after the date of the effectiveness of that amendment, could continue to manufacture his guns at home, obtain a serial number, and it has a very simple serial number, by simply advising the Metropolitan Police Department, oh, is this serial number already taken? And if not, he was allowed to use it. That way, the ghost gun becomes a non-ghost gun because the Metropolitan Police Department has, in fact, the serial number. And so if it's ever recovered at a crime scene, they'll have that be able to trace it. It protects the constitutional right, and yes, there is a constitutional right to self-manufacture firearms in this country, and against any sort of overwhelming ban that this kind of bill impacts. So you have in the DC amendments, December 6th, I think 13th of this last year, that gives you a pathway in which the objectives of this bill can be accomplished without criminalizing existing owners, because no longer, even in the DC bill, do you have a requirement that you have an 07 manufacturer imprint a serial number. The serial number does not have to comply with Section 923I of Title 18 of the United States Code. That makes it possible for the person to do it himself. Under this bill, it is impossible for the person to do it himself. And the number of 07 manufacturers in Maryland are few in number, and there will very few would be willing to undertake this process. So it's a total ban and criminalization of existing ghost gun owners. You're simply not going to be able to comply.
Okay, and then I have a quick follow-up for Mr. Jocelyn. Would you consider the bill in its current form a confiscation bill?
It's difficult to know what was in the mind of the sponsors. However, in the language of the bill, if the federal government does not promulgate the regulations as they are imagined today, now or in the near future, it does become a ban. In point of fact, yes, it is a ban. Whether that was intended, only the sponsor can tell you that. I can't answer that. I can say that the language of it is so incredibly vague that page 4, lines 11 and 12 refers to an unfinished frame or receiver. That means a forged, cast, printed, extruded, or machined body or similar article. Similar in whose terms? Similar is not defined. It goes on to say, has reached a stage of manufacture where it may be readily completed. What is readily? With the tools that a machinist has or the tools that I have? This is a subjective term. It goes on in line 15 to say, or is marketed or sold to the public to become or be used as the frame or receiver of a functional firearm once completed, assembled, or converted. So depending on how you advertise it, these unknown items could end up being, by definition here, a firearm. Legislation should not be vague, and this bill is fatally flawed. I believe it's unconstitutionally vague, and I know I'm not an attorney, but that's my view.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think, I think that the sponsor wants to put forth the best bill, so hopefully we'll be able to work with her to make sure that, if this bill does move through the committee, that any of the wrinkles are ironed out so that we don't catch the people she didn't intend to. Thank you both. Thank you all for being here.
Looking to see if anybody else has questions. I don't see any further questions for this panel. Seeing no further questions, we thank you all very much for your testimony today, and we will move on. We're going to bring in Mr. Leroll, Mr. McCann from the first panel. Edward Hirschon, Morris Gay, and Katie Novotny will fill out this next panel. We could have them come in, please, and we'll begin with Travis Leroll, who appears to be speaking, I think, is connecting to audio right now. Travis Leroll, just making sure you're not driving your vehicle, correct? All right, you're muted though, but we could see you nod your head. So if you're ready to go, we can take your testimony for 2 minutes. But you have to unmute. There we go.
All right, I'm good to go.
All right, 2 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Travis Leroll. I'm a delegate candidate for Pasadena, Maryland, and I'm calling to oppose this bill. This bill criminalizes the right to make a homemade firearm, which has been a feature of our constitutional rights for the entire history of our nation. Now, this is also an economic equality issue. I was at an event this past week and I spoke to several dozen people who had done this exact thing. And I noticed that many of them didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of options to buy the nicest handguns or rifles out there. And so they chose to build their own, which saves them a great deal of money. Past laws that have made things remain legal for the wealthy, but criminalized things for certain economic classes, generally have not helped us with regards to crime. They have resulted in increased crime because classism is not an advantage, it's a problem. It's also likely to have disproportionate impact on minorities, as we have economic issues in this state already. People have a right to create things, not to just buy them from corporations, and this would amount to a subsidy to giant corporations instead of allowing people to make things for themselves. Thank you, and I ask people to oppose this bill.
If we could have Mr. McCann, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the committee for hearing me today. My name is Bill McCann, and I am a resident of District 7, Legislative District 7, and I'm an owner of a couple of these kits. And I'm greatly concerned with this bill. I'm opposed to it, basically because I'm now concerned that I'm going to become a criminal in a very short period of time. And I'm going to have limited options, as has been discussed by Mr. Pennick and others, as to how I would deal with serializing these firearms and or destroying them, and therefore being out hundreds of dollars. In fact, it's my estimate is I would be close to like $1,500 or $1,600 out for both of these items. And no one's going to be, and I'm going to be out that information. And the only reason I did this was I wanted to learn more about firearms. I wanted to have more experience on how they operated, how they worked, how they were built, how they were designed. And that's the reason why I purchased them, to see if I could actually do, and perform the tasks necessary to successfully complete one of these firearms. And I find this law this proposed bill to be ridiculous. It's penalizing me for wanting to learn something, to make something better of myself, to be a more informed user and safe user of firearms. And I don't understand why I'm going to be penalized when there are, when the real issue is crime and criminals and not law-abiding citizens. I don't know if this has been mentioned by a previous person because I had to step away from the meeting for about an hour or so. But I believe earlier on, Attorney General Frosch mentioned that these kits came 80% assembled and that you had to just put in a couple of parts to make them complete. That's inaccurate. The 80% reference has to do with the condition of the polymer lower, the grip, the part where the rail is attached. That part is 80% finished. There's still 20% of the work required just to get the piece of plastic to accept the parts that need to be inserted. And all the parts have to be put in. Every single individual part needs to be put in once the lower is complete. So it takes hours of time. It took me hours, a number of hours over weeks and weeks of putting it together, not having it work right,
Mr.
not having it fit right. Yes.
Yeah, if you'd wrap up, please.
Okay, thank you. At this point, that's my issue, is that it's not as easy as everyone says, and I would ask the committee to be opposed to this and to render an unfavorable decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go now to Katie Novotny, then we'll go to Morris Gay. Katie Novotny, please, for 2 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon, committee. Congratulations, Delegate Moon, on your new position. So I'm Katie Novotny. I'm coming to you from Aberdeen, and I strongly oppose this bill. There's a number of problems that some people have already pointed out, but I'd like to address some inaccuracies, that were given in some of the earlier testimony for this bill. So first of all, this seems to be aimed at kits. There's a lot of talk about kits, but this bill is not just targeting kits. This bill covers any type of homemade firearm, so 3D printed, anything, not just kits that, are delivered. The federal rule that we expect to come out actually should take care of this problem with kits. Furthermore, they keep referencing that FFL dealers are going to do this engraving. Dealers are not able to engrave firearms. There's specific type of FFLs, federal firearms licensee, that are not dealers that would be the only ones allowed to do this engraving. I'm an FFL 03, which is a collector of curio and relics. I'm certainly not able to engrave any firearms. Speaking about engraving, there is no provision in this bill for people who have already chosen to engrave their homemade firearms with a serial number, even people that have registered that firearm with the state police or with the ATF as either, a handgun or a short-barreled rifle or, whatever it is and why they registered it. There's no provision for those people who already have a serial number and, have made an honest effort. There may not be room on the firearm for any more information. So that's a big issue there that I think, really needs to be addressed to improve this bill. And it's a bit disappointing. I feel like in years past, we've made quite a bit of progress on, a reasonable bill that recognizes that this is something that hobbyists do as a legitimate activity, with no criminal intent, while balancing that with safety. And so it's very disappointing that we've moved away from that this year. So also want to add,
Ms. Novotny, if you begin to wrap up, that would be fine.
yes, sir. So real quick, there's a lot of talk about handguns, and I believe it was Frosh said that, this is not meant to target long guns, but this bill does include those as well. So for all these reasons, I request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Morris Gay. I'll put out a call for Edward Hirschon. And the only other two people we have are Joshua Bailey and Nick Ditello in the room. There are a couple other people who don't have full names in the waiting room that we could see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take Mr. Gay's testimony, then we'll have one more panel after this. So Morris Gay for 2 minutes, please. If he's there. Morris Gay? Morris Gay needs to unmute.
I was just unmuted.
There
Thank
you
you.
go. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I am deeply concerned about both freedom and crime. We don't seem to be doing a very good job with this bill in balancing that. I'm concerned about the Marylanders' rights. We seem to be seeking to criminalize this constitutionally protected conduct, unnecessarily burdening law-abiding firearm owners. I got into this, my son kind of drew me into this, it was a father-son project. And it was kind of fun to build that. We've worked on our cars together and other things. And there's been historically for hundreds of years, not a thing wrong with this. Now I understand the concerns and I've listened for hours as you have. But I think we're barking up the wrong tree here. It's not, crime is a pressing public safety concern. I am as concerned about it as everybody else. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, friends, relatives. But, you say the greatest crisis, well, I happen to work for the company who produces Narcan. So I know that the opioid crisis is perhaps the greatest, and crime, but not, has a serial number on it when the guy shoots somebody. That's just simply not it. The personally made firearms, as others have pointed out, it's not the firearm, it's the person. It's the criminal. That's what, it's a gun or it's a club. We know that mostly it's clubs or knives or fists or kicking people that kill people. It's not even guns. And within that, we also know that it's less than 1% of the time that, in fact, it's 0.638% of the time that they're unserialized. I'm going to have to oppose this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gay. All right. Are there questions for this panel? Seeing none, we thank you all for your testimony today and appreciate that you've spent time with us here on this bill. So now we're going to see who is left. I think Joshua Bailey, Nicholas Ditello. We're going to call for Mike Lewis, John Hines, Jesse Ferguson. I understand that James McGettigan has had to drop off the call. I know that Sheriff Gaylor was going to try maybe and come back on at 5. So we'll keep an eye out for Sheriff Gaylor, but let's see who we have right now. I think I see Mr. Ditello. Let's hear from Nick Ditello, please, for 2 minutes, and then we'll reassess. And I do see several other people. So, all right, I'm sorry, one more person. That's all right. Let's go with Mr. Ditello for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you for your time. I just wanted to address, I'm an independent voter and a civil rights enthusiast who supports limiting abuse of police power, decriminalizing victimless crimes, and protection of minority groups, including my LGBT family, whom I protect with a 3D printed gun. Mayor Scott claimed that this is a statewide issue. However, this contradicts the repeated focus on Baltimore City and high population areas. Scott also said this bill is a tool, a new option for the police. I 100% agree with him. It will be used as yet another tool officers will unjustly use to fill our prisons for victimless crimes. Per my written testimony, there are over 18,000 imprisoned in Maryland, many for simple drug possession. How many more of your constituents will be in prison if this bill becomes law? AG Frosch focused explicitly on 80% firearms and kits. Like someone said before me, he didn't acknowledge 3D printed guns or 0% bullets of metal. These homemade guns have inherent value to the person that made it. You forcing me to destroy it or sell it, as he said, does not compensate me fairly or appropriately. And the problem with the 3D printed guns is that they're inherently brittle. The act of putting a metal plate on a 3D printed firearm would either destroy it or make it unsafe to shoot. Delegate Cox pointed out that theft of a handgun, 30 days in jail, versus this bill, 3 years for one gun, victimless crime, nobody got hurt. It's just possession. To wrap up my statement here. So another thing I want to point out is I've already paid my blood money for the state for an HQL. I've paid for fingerprints. I've met the training requirements. Now I'm being told it doesn't matter how much identification I've already given. You literally have my fingerprints. How many serialized firearms the state knows about? One gun that's not serialized and I go to jail. Delegate Lopez, you mentioned that this bill has been called reasonable, yet I feel unfairly targeted. Nobody ever asked the 3D printing community or FFLs, I feel, if this bill's requirements were even feasible. One last thing.
One last thing is fine. We need you to begin to wrap up. Thank you.
May I have permission to show just a 2-inch piece of plastic on the screen?
I mean,
it has it does not look like a gun.
I'm asking you to wrap up your comments, and you've gone over the 2 minutes. Do you have a final statement?
Yes, I just wanted to show that screw holes on 3D printed guns can put cracks and damage that are unavoidable. I just wanted to point that out. But anyway, please consider voting unfavorably on House Bill 425.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Joshua Bailey now. Mr. Bailey? He was there. Joshua Bailey? There we go. Mr. Bailey, for 2 minutes, please.
All right. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, as other people discuss, there's no legal avenue for people to build their own firearms as hobbyists under this proposed legislation. After 2023, it's an effective blanket ban. There's no avenue for anyone to apply for a serial number or, and be compliant with the law while exercising their right to build a firearm. This isn't a bill to criminalize. This isn't 3 years in jail if you're caught committing a crime with an unserialized firearm. If you're milling out 40 P80 frames in your basement, that's manufacturing with the intent of sale without without being a federal firearms licensee. That's a federal felony. This isn't targeting people committing crimes with these firearms. This is targeting any Marylander who would want to legally and safely, build firearms. I mean, I'm just frustrated because over years these extreme measures to further restrict, our Second Amendment rights in Maryland. I live in Baltimore City. I've been robbed at gunpoint. I've been pistol whipped. It's not a kid milling out. It's not a kid with a drill press in the basement that's causing all this crime. It's a lack of economic opportunity. Won't go to war on drugs. I mean, To be frank, I understand how, the veto-proof majority, we haven't been able to legalize recreational marijuana to cut the drug profits are driving all the crime in the city I've lived in my entire life. So I urge I do want to thank everybody for the time. It's been a couple hours now. But this bill, it doesn't hold water. It's not going to address the crime in the city. It's overly broad. It doesn't provide legal avenues for gun owners to comply and maintain their hobbies without becoming felons. I mean,
Mr. Bailey, if you would begin to wrap up, please.
So yeah, just in summary, yeah, I in no way I can support this bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll go now to Jesse Ferguson now for 2 minutes, please.
Greetings, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Jesse Ferguson. I'm from Federalsburg, which is District 37B on the Eastern Shore. I'm a father, husband, avid hunter, firearms enthusiast, and firearms hobbyist. The fact that the Firearms Safety Act of 2013 is considered a success by some is incredibly delusional. It is not hard to examine the trends in violent crimes, including murder, and conclude that the law is an abject failure. In earlier testimony, Attorney General Frosch stated this bill will keep them, ghost guns, out of the hands of violent criminals. We already have laws prohibiting persons convicted of certain crimes from possessing a firearm, including handguns. We already have laws implementing age requirements to purchase a firearm, including handguns. We already have laws prohibiting persons from engaging in the manufacture of firearms, including handguns, without the proper federal licenses. We already have laws requiring persons to acquire the handgun qualification license, which involves a background check prior to purchasing a handgun. We already have laws prohibiting persons from stealing firearms, including handguns. We already have laws prohibiting persons from selling firearms, including handguns, to other persons without going through the 77-hour process, which includes a background check and 7-day waiting period. We already have laws prohibiting the use of a firearm in the commission of a crime. Yet, we also have year after year of record-breaking numbers of violent crimes, including murders. From a recent WBAL news article, the number of ghost guns seized last year was 345. From the article stating representing 15% of the total of all guns seized in the city. That means 85% of the other guns, about 2,000 of them, were not ghost guns and had serial numbers, possibly. Obviously, existing laws are not keeping guns out of the hands of violent criminals. What makes this bill, should it become law, different than the existing laws? How will this bill, should it become law, reduce the trend of increasing levels of violent crimes, including murders? I have a sincere belief that this bill, should it become law, will have no significant impact on anyone other than law-abiding hobbyists. The focus needs to change from the object used by violent criminals to the actions of these persons. I urge an unfavorable report from the committee on House Bill 425. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions for this panel? Seeing no questions, we thank you all very much for spending time with us today and speaking with us. I believe that is the last, those are the last people to testify on House Bill 425. Just making sure with staff that there's no one else in the waiting room, so that's fine. That concludes the testimony for House Bill 425. I just will note for the record that Sheriff Gaylor from Harford County was unable to hang on. We were going to try and get him back on in a little bit, but we're done. So we will, he will provide some comments, I believe, in writing if he hasn't already, and that will be fine. That concludes the testimony for the House Judiciary Committee today. We will be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and we will see you all again then.